our vice chair. Morning, Doug.
Good morning.
And give me 1 second. I actually see Tom McKenna is telling me he has a Zoom error. It's saying forbidden to him. Let's see if everyone, can I pause for 1 second? Megan, maybe we pause the recording. I will send the Zoom link out to everybody through.
Zoom update, so that was it.
Okay, well then I'm not going to bother finish sending the message. So I'm just going to continue on.
Right, thank
you. Okay, so we have our note takers. We've got Rich, and is Claire here with us? It's here yet. So Rich, you're up for the note taking.
Good to hear.
I think she said she was joining from vacation, so we'll see if she's able to join us. She was not certain of her connection. So I'm going to go on down the rest of the room. You can see I've got a little hobbit over my shoulder. Camps are out this week. So Christoph.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Christoph Toulouse, Executive Director at the Center for the Inland Bays.
Great. A.G. Robbins. E.G., well, happy to say good morning to you. If you're able to unmute.
I'm talking, but you can't hear me.
Hello.
Good morning. I'm with the Citizens Monitoring Program, and I apologize. You caught me in the middle of breakfast.
Well, that's just fine. If you heard our banter before we started, we were teasing that at a fully virtual Zoom, you need to provide yourself your own snack. So we're happy you have that, because typically in an in-person meeting, that's what we do, is we try to feed you some coffee, donuts, and bagels. So, all right, Aaron Givens.
Hi, I'm Aaron Givens. I work with the Nutrient Management Program at the Delaware Department of Agriculture.
Good morning, Aaron. Anna, I see you're here with us.
Good morning, Anna Fagan. I'm Deputy Director with the Center.
Ashley?
DNREC Delaware Coastal Programs.
Good morning. Ben.
Morning, Ben Coverdale with DNREC's Non-Point Source Program.
Great, thanks, Ben. Nice to see you. Bob on the iPhone. Bob, hopefully you've introduced yourself in the chat, because I'm not monitoring them both at the moment. Brittany?
Morning, Brittany Sturgis, DNREC, Division of Watershed Stewardship, Watershed Assessment and Management Section. Tongue-tied. Got it out though, it's Friday.
Yeah, good job. Brianna.
Morning, everyone. I'm Brianna. I'm the Center's Watershed Coordinator.
Morning. Dave.
Hi, I'm Dave Davis. I'm with Dewey Beach as the chair of the Climate Change Committee there, so I'm here to learn.
Great, Dave. It's great. I'm happy to hear Dewey Beach has a climate change committee. It's something I might reach out to you on in my extension role. Yeah, great. Ed, where are you at?
Morning. Excuse me. Yeah, Ed, we're at University of Delaware Citizen Monitoring Program.
Morning, Ed. Gabby.
Morning, everyone. Gabby Fritz from Inland Bays. I'm the science technician.
Nice to see you, Gabby. Holly.
Hi, I'm Holly Walker. I'm in the DNREC Conservation Program section, and I'm in the Chesapeake Implementation Program.
Great. And I see we have someone who's in as iPhone guest. Who is that? All right, again. Well,
I think that's me. I think that's me. My name's Amanda. I'm a resident just listening in for education.
Well, welcome, Amanda. If you could put your name in the chat, if you're able to do that on your phone, that would be great for us to have a record of who you are, and it's nice to have you with us. Kelly.
Good morning, Kelly Summers with the EPA Region 3 office.
Morning. Leslie. I know we're hearing more from you later, but let's just get a sound check from you right now. Leslie, are you trying to, oh, I see you. Are you, oh, I can't hear you though. Nope, not hearing you. Go ahead and do a mic check if you can. Test your microphone and speaker connection through Zoom and we'll come back to you. I'm glad you're here though. Lisa Delaney, are you able to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm a relatively new citizen of Sussex County. I live on Arnell Creek, so I'm here to learn everything I can.
Well, great, welcome. Mike Bott.
Good morning, everyone. I work with the Division of Watershed Stewardship and the Watershed Assessment and Management section as well. So nice to see everyone.
Nice to have you here, Mike. Michelle.
Morning, everyone. My name is Michelle. I'm the Director of Conservation Watershed Planning with the Center.
Hey, Michelle. Molly, we'll also hear more from you, but let's get a sound check.
Hi, everyone. I'm Molly Yakino. I'm with DENREC's Coastal Program.
Good, and I'm Yakino because I was not saying it that way in my head. So thanks for correcting that for me. Nivette.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nivette Perez, and I am the Manager of Community Science at the Center.
Good morning. Taylor.
Morning, I'm Taylor Hoffman. I'm the Science and Restoration Intern with the Center.
Nice to meet you, Tara. Tom. We did see and hear from you
Yeah,
earlier.
Tom McKenna from the Delaware Geological Survey at the University of Delaware.
Great. What's your background? What is that?
Rocks.
I was going to say mulch, so that wasn't that far off. And then let's see, Zena.
Good morning, Zena Hens, DENREC, Division of Fish and Wildlife.
Good morning, Zena. Okay, so I see we have a phone number, 1202. Is that person able to introduce themselves? Okay, please introduce yourself in the chat if you're able to. And then Kristen C. Pause for a minute. If not, please introduce yourself in the chat. I've seen a couple people pop in as I've been going through the list alphabetically. Steve Williams.
Morning, everyone. Steve Williams, DENREC Watershed Assessment and Management section.
Nice to see you. Claire, I've seen you join us.
Yes, hi, Claire Summers. I'm the chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee. Sorry I'm late. Zoom just did this whole thing. I have no clue.
You're not the only one. It happened to a couple of other people too.
Okay, thank you.
Glad you're in and you're situated now.
And I'm the speaker, so yeah, thanks everyone. Bye.
Well, I told Rich he was up when I didn't have you right off.
Yeah, no, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, geez, okay, thanks.
Glad we have a great tag team between the two of you. All right, is there anybody else who has not had an opportunity to introduce themselves who would like to do that this morning? Oh, Mark Nardi, I see you. There you are.
I'm Mark Nardi. I'm with the USGS. Had Zoom issues as well, like everybody else, I guess.
All right, yeah, it's going around. So glad to have everyone here. Anybody else? Last call for introductions. Also, if as Megan pointed out, if you can please put your full name and affiliation into the chat, especially if you are just having a phone number or an abbreviated name appearing on the Zoom screen.
And hello, I'm Megan Noy Fellows. I'm the Director of Science at the Center. And absolutely, if you're just visiting us for today, you may feel, oh, I don't need to sign in, but we do keep a record of everybody here. And this meeting is recorded, so we do have your name, but it's just a lot easier for us if it's all in the chat. We can, Claire and Rich won't pull their hair out setting up the.
Figure out who you are.
Yep.
It's too late for that, Megan.
Well, thank you. And Megan, I'm sorry I skipped right over you. You were one of our most important people to have here. So before diving into our agenda for today, I wanted to take a moment and recognize and acknowledge a STAC member who is not here with us, and that is Susie Ball. So Susie was the chair of the board for the Center for the Inland Bays. She was a member of our Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee. I believe she started out as an active member of the Citizens Advisory Committee, and sadly, she passed away last month. I did not know, I wasn't aware that she had been dealing with some serious medical issues for several months now. And so when I heard of the news, I was really taken back by that. Susie, I have a little way of trying to remember people's names, and she was Susie Fireball to me. She was just passionate, full of energy and enthusiasm for the work that the center does. And she ran a great meeting too. I really admired her meeting management skills, and that's something I was really glad that I actually got to talk to her about, was her ability to really run a tight meeting and get through a lot of really important issues together in an efficient fashion. So I just wanted to take a minute to really just recognize how important Susie was to this group, as well as the larger center and the Inland Bays as an estuary. So I saw a couple people putting things in the chat. I'm not sure if anybody else from the center wanted to say anything. I think they have some plans in the works for acknowledging Susie and the important role that she had for the Center for the Inland Bays.
Well, Jen, if it's okay, I'll just speak up for a second. Everybody, this is Christophe Toulouse, the executive director at the center. And just want to say that, you know, my relationship with Susie, it may not have been as long as others, but I know that we've all lost a terrific friend, and someone who is extremely accomplished in her life, and for whom the Center for the Inland Bays was the passion at the end. And so I am personally very grateful for having had a chance to get to know and work with Susie. I agree with Jen that she was not only a wonderful person. A fireball is a perfect example of description many of us would have applied to her, but also someone who took her role as the chairman of the board as an extremely important job in her life, and one to which she was most committed. And so anyway, we've lost a terrific friend, and someone who knew the center inside and out, because she had grown up with us as a volunteer and doing so many wonderful things. So anyway, thank you, Jen, for acknowledging her loss.
Absolutely. It's a loss for all of us. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Megan for some additional staffing updates. I think we've heard a bunch of new names, so maybe she can kind of put that into context for us.
Thanks. So this summer, we were lucky enough to have Taylor Hoffman as our Sea Grant intern. She's been mostly working with our SAV program, but also helping out with fish surveys, oyster lease. We sent her out to clean the cages one day and she still came back, so yay. But if you want to reach out to her to find out how she's doing, I guess sometimes there's time on the schedule and the intern will do a brief presentation, but we have a loaded schedule here in August. So it was no slamming on Taylor that we don't have her giving a presentation today. But maybe in October, she'll be back for an update. But if you're interested in SAV in the Inland Bays, she is our go-to person. Also, the center was very happy for them, but very sad for us. In July, we lost both Zach and Andrew. Zach has chosen to go back to grad school in natural history filmmaking. So yay for Zach. We hope to see his name up there behind the camera with David Attenborough out front anytime soon now. And hopefully his first feature film will be on the Inland Bays. I think we got that in blood. I don't know. And then Andrew was promoted within the NEP. He'll be up in Barnegat Bay leading the science team up there. So huge loss for us, huge happiness for them. But it does mean that we have 2 openings. We are advertising and taking resumes and cover letters until the 25th of August. So if you've always wanted to work with the center or have some good folks you want to reach out and send our way, please either reach out to me and I can provide you the link to the descriptions on our website, or have them check us out. Any other staffing updates? Okay, Thank you. Jen, you're on mute.
I was going to say, you're next up with the next part of our old business is an update on the environmental monitoring plan efforts.
So the environmental monitoring plan, thank you all again for working through it with us. I think it's February until July. We were looking at the old environmental monitoring plan, making those updates, making those recommendations, and it was approved internally by CIB. Next, it goes to our board of directors for them to authorize it, and then it will go to EPA after that. But we're on track for the September executive board meeting, I believe it will be presented at. So again, thank you very much. Not that we want to sign up for additional standing committee meetings. And maybe it was just because it was all new to me that it was so overwhelming. But if there's an interest in kind of having a STAC committee that we take a look at it more frequently, that we kind of put it in chunks, I am open to, and Jen was open to, appointing a STAC subcommittee to follow up with the environmental monitoring plan. It does need to be updated every 2 years. And in the last one, it actually said there was a standing STAC subcommittee on such a topic. So we deleted that from this one since we couldn't ever find a record of one, but it doesn't sound like a terrible idea. If people are interested in monitoring and have a good idea of the holistic assessment of what the Inland Bays monitoring plan should be, please reach out to me. We will need to identify a chair, and then members of the standing subcommittee don't have to be members of STAC. So if there's somebody that you work with or colleague, partner from another organization, they are welcome to join that particular aspect of STAC without having to join STAC in total. And then we can talk about how frequently we'd meet as we go forward. But if there's any interest, I don't know if we want to open for discussion, Jen, or whether we just want to put it out there as a topic idea.
Well, I think it is sort of important to say we don't necessarily need to wait 2 years till we look at the plan that was just finalized to go and say, well, have we done these things? It's probably a good idea to make sure we're doing them along the way, the priority recommendations, and then really thinking about and having those discussions about, are there metrics, are there things in here that are not needed anymore, and sort of make plans for the phase out of what we no longer need to track in the monitoring plan. So I support the idea of having a standing subcommittee. As you pointed out, I think it's really important to have leadership for each subcommittee, and I can't chair every single subcommittee that we have. I think it's great to give other leadership opportunities for those of us within the group, but then reaching out within our wider organizations for possibly that expertise or involvement to lead the effort. So certainly if anybody has comments or ideas, feel free to share them now or put them into the chat, or reach out to either Megan or myself after this meeting with your thoughts on that. But that's something that we are considering doing so that it's not every 2 years, let's look at this thing and update it, rather more of a continuous effort. Seeing and hearing none, I guess nobody has ideas at the moment. So we'll move on to the next topic, which is still having Megan center stage. And this is for our hydrodynamic and model development. We did pull together I would say an ad hoc group of folks to look at developing an RFP. So Megan, where are we at with that first?
We were totally on track to get the RFP finalized and out this fall. We had a little bit of a staffing shortfall at the center. So the hydrodynamic model did get triaged into the lower priority zone, but we do have an ad hoc committee. We have Dr. Shin from UDEL. He said that he would be happy to serve on our RFP and our proposal and review committee. And then we also have a hydrodynamic modeler out of Louisiana. I thought it was important to have somebody with a completely outside perspective and not not as familiar with all of the assumptions that we already have. So we have to explain to him all of our assumptions and fact check them. So they have definitely provided me comments on the RFP, and it's on my plate to get it back out there, but it is something that's going to be delayed a couple more months while we solve our current staffing.
And as far as everybody knows too, or just so that everybody knows, we're not really on a schedule where it had to be at by a certain date, according to, I think the CCMP and some other STAC planning documents. We really have this whole year to really be able to put that out, but there's no need to wait till the end of this year to do that. So, or the fiscal year, correct? I think.
Right. I think it's next fiscal year that we're supposed to have the contractor in place. So we have some time for that. And of course, we still have access to the BIL funding to pay for it. And that also does not expire. So we will still have the funding, and we just need to be able to refocus when it can be back into the priority.
Right. So
hopefully there's no objectives to that.
Yeah. Doug, is there something you wanted to add to this? No? Okay. Next, we're going to go and move to some of our standing subcommittee updates. Brianna, you're up first with the wastewater subcommittee.
Yep. Hi, everyone. For those of you who are new to STAC, the wastewater subcommittee of STAC is working on a nutrient budget for wastewater discharges in the watershed, specifically focusing on nitrogen. And a year ago this month, actually, we received DMR reports for the 26 facilities, locations we are analyzing from the years 2011 to 2021. So in total, 10 years for each location. Unfortunately, there was a significant amount of reports missing from that pool that was sent over to us, but they have been trickling into us from DENREC since June of this year, which is pretty great. All these reports need to be copied by hand into Excel because the data needs to be converted into a workable format. So they're almost all PDF format that are sent to us. Based off the amount of reports left, we should have this conversion stage done within a few months. And fortunately, with the help of Scott Andres, we have begun to lay out the formulas for the calculation process. To reiterate, the goal of the calculation, or the goal is to calculate the total pounds of nitrogen from effluent sources in the watershed, in addition to the total volume of water from spray irrigation and flow. And since we are using Excel and have those preliminary formulas laid out, the calculation stage shouldn't take that long at all. And it's also the stage that I am looking forward to most because I love working with calculations and stats. Overall, this project is very much still moving forward. And for those on the subcommittee, be on the lookout for the next update from me and meeting to take a closer look at those formulas.
Great. Thank you, Brianna. Questions, comments, ideas, or feedback for Brianna and the wastewater subcommittee? Thank you for leading that effort for us, and good luck with all of your calculations and doing your math projects. I'm looking forward to see what you get.
Thank you.
Okay, and next we're going to go to Mark Nardi, who is chairing our new subcommittee that is looking at the nearshore impacts of offshore wind.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mark.
Hey, so the subcommittee's task is directed at understanding the impacts related to cable routing options from the offshore wind farm to where it connects from the grid, to the grid rather. And so we're limiting our geographic purview to basically essentially where the cable comes ashore to where it will connect to the grid. So all other questions related to other geographies are not being considered. So just want to kind of throw that out there as kind of that is our geographic focus, and that's what we're sticking to. The idea is that we'll have ready responses as part of the permitting process when those documents come out and when the center needs to respond. So far, membership's composed of people from the CIB, academia, private consulting, the US EPA, US Forest Service, and USGS. And I have to say many thanks to Megan. She's keeping us straight. She's keeping us on time. This could not be done without her. She's just been fantastic with this. So Megan, thank you very, very much. So far, the meetings have been bi-weekly. They started in, I think about mid-May 2023. They're open to the public, and we generally hold them on the second and fourth Tuesdays in the afternoon of each month. Thus far, we've met with US Wind and will meet with Ørsted. The goals of these meetings are to basically better understand details about the cable routing, and cable laying process. They generally ran, the one with, US Wind was probably about almost 3 hours long. And it started off with US Wind providing some PowerPoints and some discussion. And then it followed with a very long kind of Q&A session. So far, the committee has identified some areas of concern. One of them is electromagnetic field effects on sharks and rays, possible effects of cable temperature on groundwater, overland routing, either all or portion of the route being overland. We're interested in questions of birds and bats and plants. And then there's also a question related to sediment modeling. So we're a little concerned if they do choose through the water route, cable laying route, is all the sediment being adequately modeled. We haven't dug into their sediment modeling yet. And then we also have some pretty serious concerns related to the remobilization of the possible, I should say, remobilization of contaminants that are currently sequestered in the sediment that may get blown up and moved around as part of the cable installation process. So that's pretty much where we are. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'm happy to answer them now.
So I saw Ashley Norton dropped into the chat that the public comment for the notice of intent for BOEM's Central Atlantic wind areas is currently open. So if folks have an interest in commenting there, she's provided the link to do so. Are there other comments or questions for Mark right now with this committee? I want to say thank you, Mark, for providing the leadership to this, because I think it is really important. The center wanted to know really what are the potential concerns. So it looks like you're doing the due diligence that we wanted to identify those issues and be aware of them so that the center is able to respond in the future.
Yeah, I'd only say that we are. It's the group for sure.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Well, you got a great team, so good job identifying people to participate in that committee as well. One last call. Any questions or comments for Mark? If you don't have any now, he has said that these meetings are open to the public, so they could get you on that schedule if you're interested in participating or observing them. And if not, we'll move on. So part of our new business is we always like to offer the invitation for some of our new members to provide an introductory presentation so we can learn a little bit about themselves, learn a little bit about their interest in the inland bays and how they might be able to engage with us as a STAC member. So we've had 2 new members join us over recent months. Leslie Baggett actually joined, I think, back in the winter or spring, but was not able to be with us at our April meeting. So we're going to invite her to share with us first today. So Leslie is with RFK, correct? If I'm getting that acronym correct. I'm checking. AKRF.
I get it confused too.
Well, Leslie, welcome. I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Would you like me to share your slide deck, or do you want to do it yourself and run through it?
Let's see here. I guess if you could, and then I tell you to go through it, that'll probably be faster than
give me a second, because I actually forgot to open it up on my window. All right, opening now. Oh goodness, stop. What just happened? I went to open my drive and it's starting to play a video instead. CIB presentation, here it is, it's opening now. All right, there we go.
Thank you. All right, so as mentioned, my name is Leslie Baggett, and I am a senior marine or a senior environmental professional with AKRF. I've been with the company about 2 years. We are based in New York, but we have satellite offices kind of throughout New England and the Mid-Atlantic. So a little background about my education. I am from Alabama. I moved up to Virginia about 3 years ago. I got my BS and my MS from the University of Alabama. So roll tide, I'm obligated. I have to say that every time we mention the University of Alabama. And I got my PhD from the University of South Alabama. So you can see in all three of my degrees, I was focused towards marine science. Okay, next slide. So throughout my career since college and past graduate school and everything, I've had kind of a little bit of varied experience. So as you can see from the internships that are first listed, I thought I was going to go into the aquarium husbandry type field. And so I had internships at Clearwater Marine Aquarium, at Moat Marine Aquarium, and then later after graduation, I worked at Ripley's Aquarium of the Smokies for a while back around 2001. I was kind of doing this as I was kind of going through grad school. So I did work as an environmental consultant for a short time with Volkert Incorporated. And we mainly focused on NEPA projects, but unfortunately, a lot of that stuff was terrestrial and federal highway projects. So that really wasn't my main interest. So then after getting my PhD, I went on and did a postdoctoral position at the University of South Florida, and then on to another one at the Dauphin Island Sea Lab, University of South Alabama. And we'll talk about some of the research that I did throughout that period here in a few slides. After that, I was an associate professor of biology at a small little university on the Gulf Coast called the University of Mobile. I was there for 7 years while there was a coordinator for their marine science program. And I also taught summer school classes for graduate and undergraduate students at the Dauphin Island Sea Lab during this time. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Dauphin Island Sea Lab, which I assume most of you aren't, since that's a Gulf Coast place, basically the entire state of Alabama sends all their marine science students down there for their marine science education. And so it's a consortium of 22 different universities and colleges. So getting to teach there was quite fun. All right, so back when I was getting my master's at the University of Alabama, I looked at the effects of horseshoe crab bioturbation activities on benthic and fauna in sand and mudflat communities. And what got me interested in that in Port St. Joe was the fact that there's a population, a nice little population of horseshoe crabs there, and a scientific warehouse, like basically where they provide preserved specimens to educational facilities, was coming in and collecting huge amounts of the horseshoe crabs there. So I was interested in seeing what would happen if you removed this major bioturbator from these communities. And so that occurred, like I said, in Port St. Joe and St. Joseph Bay, which you can see is right along the northern coast of Florida on the Panhandle. It's pretty near Panama City, for those of you who are familiar with that area. Okay, next slide. Now for my doctoral research, I worked at did all of my work down in the Florida Bay area, which is a great gig if you can get it. And so looking at the effects of nutrient enrichment on seagrass communities, and not just on epiphytic growth and the health of the seagrass as well, but also on the stoichiometry, growth, and fecundity of the epiphyte grazers in Florida Bay. And so how does eating this enriched diet affect the actual grazers that are eating it? And we also looked at the effects of grazer species composition on those epiphytic communities and on seagrass condition to see if there were, basically the idea is if you see a seagrass bed that's overgrown with epiphytes, there must be something wrong with your grazer community because they're not taking care of that epiphytic overgrowth. And so that was another aspect of what we kind of looked into, looking at gastropods, Caridian shrimp, and also hermit crabs, small hermit crabs as well. We tried to include pinfish in there because they are known to kind of eat grass at certain parts of their life stages, but unfortunately, all the pinfish I ever tried to use in those experiments died out of spite. The next Oh, I see someone, Lisa, popping up saying that she lived in St. Joe Pay for 6 years, but then you know just how beautiful that it is. And yes, scallops are fun to chase around the bay there. So then for my next postdoctor, or my first postdoctoral position, I was at the University of South Florida, and I worked on oh, I'm sorry, could you change the slide? Sorry, thanks. And so during this postdoc, I worked on a NASA-funded joint project with the USF Department of Integrated Biology and the Department of Geography, Environment, and Planning. But we also worked with Pinellas County as well to help them find a more efficient way of assessing their SAB resources. And so the idea here was to use remote sensing from 3 different satellites so that we could see which one would give us the best correlation with the actual density of the seagrass on in situ. And so I was part of the effort that led the ground-based efforts to help gather the data and ground truth the data that was used to build the model that would help interpret the satellite imagery. Okay, next. Thanks. More recently, when I was a postdoc at Dolphin Island State Lab, University of South Alabama, I worked on a NOAA and Nature Conservancy funded project to develop a oyster habitat restoration monitoring and assessment handbook. And so the idea here was to develop recommendations for metrics so that we could have a basement assessment of oyster restoration projects, be able to compare projects within and across regions and tidal elevations and various construction types that are used with oyster restoration. Also to come up with ideas for adaptive management and improvement of project design over time. And so that the data that would be gathered through a kind of standardized modeling, monitoring and assessment then could be used for adaptive management and to better inform future oyster restoration projects. And so that was the idea, is that the more that we learn, the better that we can spend our restoration dollars from standardized monitoring. Okay, next slide. Now, more recently with AKRF, a lot of the work that I do is with offshore wind. And so I support NEPA documentation, so the writing of biological assessments and also environmental impact statements for offshore wind projects that are located in the New England and Mid-Atlantic region. So far I've worked on Empire Wind, Atlantic Shores South, currently starting up with Atlantic Shores North and Beacon Wind as well. And so my job is to help provide expertise on benthic habitats, and that's kind of why I was brought in. Okay, next slide. Now, when we look at the impacts of offshore wind to benthic resources, whether they're inshore or out offshore, the things that we look at are called, or the things that can cause impacts are called impact producing factors, so IPFs. So when it comes to benthic habitats, these are the main IPFs that we analyze as a third-party contractor to see the impacts of these projects. So we look at things like accidental releases, and this will be things like fuels, fluids, and hazardous material contaminants, trash and debris coming off of the boats and construction sites, but also the accidental release of invasive species is covered under this IPF. We look at the impacts of anchoring during construction and decommissioning, and if any anchoring has to occur during O&M. We look at the effects of cable emplacement and maintenance. We also look at the impacts of discharges and intake, and this is basically permitted discharges, so things like bilge water and treated liquid wastes, and any kind of leaching of chemicals from anti-fouling and anti-corrosive coatings. EMF and heat is, as previously mentioned in this by Mark, that we are interested in the effects of EMF and heat, particularly on elasmobranchs, but also you have to look at the benthic organisms as well, the infauna. So this is something where this is kind of a new field where there more and more studies are being done on it and looking specifically at the impacts of this on the organisms. Also gear utilization, and this is the look at the impacts of the kind of the pre-surveys and the pre-construction and during construction, post-construction surveys, the gear that is used, the grab samplers or anything else that are using to do fisheries and benthic surveys, what will the impacts of that be? Noise is also a big deal, especially with sea turtles and marine mammals. We look at that with benthic resources as well. And we consider the noise from vessels, the G&G surveys from pile driving and operational wind turbines as well. When it comes to the structures themselves, we look at the impacts on hydrodynamics, particularly off the coast for the foundations. You know, they're very interested in the cold pool and any impacts that may occur because of the presence of the structures. And then also habitat conversion, the fact that you're taking, you know, what is generally a soft sediment benthic environment and converting it over to one that has vertical structure in places where vertical structure really aren't present before, but also you have, you know, the covering up of the benthic habitat with scour protection and things like that. And then also we look at port utilization, which is just the increased number of vessels that will be coming in and out of the ports during the 3 stages, during construction, O&M, and decommissioning. So it's a pretty comprehensive look at everything you can think of that may impact benthic resources, and that's what I do. Next slide. I'm also currently coordinating a 5-year post deployment monitoring of oyster enhancement structures that have been installed in Hudson River Park by the Hudson River Park Trust. Back in 2021, the trust installed over 200 enhancement structures within the park, within the park's waters. And this is to support their research and their habitat enhancement and education goals. And they wanted to increase the park's oyster population and also provide habitat for benthic and epibenthic and mobile species. And these structures include biohuts, textured concrete pile encasements, pile wraps, reef balls, and gabions. And so we have researchers that we brought together from Rutgers, from New Jersey City University, from the University of New Hampshire, the Hudson River Foundation, and the Hudson River Park Trust that go out, and twice a year we are monitoring these structures for oyster presence, also any kind of encrusting epibenthic or epibenthic fauna that are present on these structures. And then we also do mobile fauna sampling around the structures to see how it's affecting the larger mobile invertebrates and fish. So that's been a fun project. Other projects I've been involved in involve the implementation of an EFH mitigation plan for the New Jersey wind port, also helping to develop an SAV mitigation plan for the Port of Albany expansion project. I did the final report for the new Governor Mario Cuomo Bridge, their benthic monitoring program that AKRF was in charge of or working as part of. And then also I worked on the Habitat Sampling Program Year 2 report for New York's Financial District Biological and Habitat Sampling Program. So that's just kind of, while a lot of the work I do is on offshore wind, I do get to dabble in other stuff as well. And anyone have any questions? That's it.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm definitely a little jealous of some of your grad school and postdoc work. It's like you were in beautiful locations doing some really interesting things. And your more recent work with the offshore wind and kind of work along the East Coast is very relevant to obviously some of the things that we're looking at here in the Inland Bays. So we're glad to have you join our committee.
Happy to be here.
Any questions or comments for Leslie? All right, well, thank you, Leslie. And then our next new member is Molly Yakino. And Molly is joining us from DENREC. If you guys all recall, we used to have somebody from the coastal programs that was very involved. Gosh, I'm forgetting. It's St. Oh gosh, I'm blanking on her name right now. Harry St. Laurent. Thank you. I was like having the Saint part, but nothing else. So Molly has joined DENREC in basically what was Carrie's position. So Carrie was a very active member of our STAC, so we're happy to have Molly here as well. So Molly, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, just give me 1 second and I will share these slides. Okay, are y'all able to see? Great. Hi, everyone. Like Jen said, I'm Molly Yakino. I'm the research coordinator and senior environmental scientist with Delaware's National Estuarine Research Reserve and Coastal Management Program. These are both part of the coastal section of DENREC's Division of Climate, Coastal, and Energy. Sorry, that was a lot of words. I still haven't figured out a succinct way to say it all. So I'm going to be going through a little bit of my path that brought me to this position and how it can be useful for the CIB STAC. So I got my undergrad degree in marine sciences from Boston University. So like Leslie, my degrees were all marine science based, and I got that in 2017. And during my time in Boston, I worked with Dr. Wally Fulweiler for 4 years. And this is where I first got my introduction to doing science in estuarine and coastal marshes. And I worked on a variety of projects over my time in Boston, both as independent research and as an undergraduate research assistant on graduate student work. So I wanted to touch on a few of these projects since they were pretty formative in my professional development, but there were others as well. So the first was my independent research focusing on determining the role of macroalgae in estuarine silicon cycling. And from there, I also worked on, and this was within the Wacoit Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. So you will notice throughout my talk, working within your system was pretty central to my development as a scientist. And I also in the Wacoit Bay Reserve, I worked on a project looking at the alteration of ecosystem functions by hypoxia in shallow coastal estuaries. And so this was work I was doing with former graduate student, Dr. Sarah Foster. And it was primarily looking at how these hypoxic benthic conditions is impacting nitrogen processing and greenhouse gas fluxes in shallow coastal estuaries. I also, during this time, worked with former graduate student, Dr. Holly Emery, that assessed the impact of extreme weather events, which, as we know, are predicted to increase with climate change on marsh greenhouse gas emissions. So this was everything from creating drought conditions to extreme stormy conditions, and then how those greenhouse gas fluxes changed in according with that. After graduating from BU in 2017, I went on to complete my PhD at the University of North Carolina's Chapel Hill's Institute of Marine Sciences. So if you're not familiar with the North Carolina coast, it's down in the southern part of the coast, the Crystal Coast, and it's part of the Chapel Hill main campus. And I worked with Dr. Michael Peeler. And at UNC, my research was primarily focused on biogeochemistry and ecology at the land-water margin. As you can see, we've got this beautiful, beautiful mural on IMS, kind of showing that transition from that transition zone. So my dissertation focused on Phragmites australis, which I'm sure most, if not everyone here, knows is an invasive invasive grass found in both fresh and brackish systems. And my dissertation research established Phragmites, though non-native, can play an important role in coastal nitrogen cycling, and that's largely been overlooked previously. And this was especially true in brackish systems. So when you have a little bit more salt in the system, it seems to do a particularly good job of mitigating that nitrogen entering the system. This was in particular true following extreme storm events. So during, I guess it was the second year I was at UNC, Hurricane Florence hit Eastern North Carolina. And for those who are not familiar, it dumped about 18 inches, more than 18 inches of rain, and caused weeks of coastal flooding. Eastern North Carolina is known for a few things. It's beautiful beaches, but also a lot of agriculture and a lot of livestock operations. So about 33% of this area is composed of these ag and livestock operations. So with that flooding, it brought with it a lot of animal waste, a lot of nutrient runoff, and a lot of, sorry, my dog wants to bark. Let's hope he keeps it down. It brought a lot of that into the coastal waters. And I had, honestly, just by chance, sampled Phragmites just prior to the storm. And so we were able to go back about a week following the storm, about a week following when we were able to get back into the area, and look at how Phragmites was processing those nutrients as compared to our native marsh grasses. And I also assessed other factors that may impact the facilitation of this ecosystem function. So things like where Phragmites is growing, so it doesn't just grow in marshes, it can grow in stormwater ponds, it can grow in ditches, it can grow in people's yards, kind of pop up anywhere. And I also did some work quantifying the economic value of nitrogen removal facilitated by Phragmites using an avoided cost approach. So this was possible in North Carolina, primarily because it has a nutrient offset program for nitrogen. And so we were able to give at least some amount of dollar value to what this nitrogen removal is worth. And I should mention this work was funded through graduate fellowships from North Carolina Sea Grant, the Albemarle Pamlico National Estuary Partnership, and North Carolina Coastal Reserve, which is part of the National Estuarine Research Reserve System. As kind of a side component of my dissertation research, I also did some preliminary work using unmanned aerial vehicles, so drones, to capture high resolution imagery of small sections of the two NEARS reserves that I was working in. And then I used this imagery and a lot of field observations to train a support vector machine to identify areas of Phragmites throughout in the reserve system in lower resolution Landsat imagery. So it's kind of a low cost way of getting at how much frag is present in the system. And we were able to get about 87% accuracy compared when we with the accuracy assessment. And you don't need to look too closely at these. I just like the frag. It's very clear, like this is a big frag patch, and you can really see it nicely on when we ran it. In addition to my work on Phragmites, when I was in Carolina, I also worked on projects looking at nitrogen assimilation across the coastal urban landscape. I did a lot of work doing water quality monitoring. So we have about a 15-year data set of water quality monitoring just outside our marine lab, and monitoring nitrogen removal capabilities in restored marshes. So we had done a restored marsh for the marine lab since it's located right on Bogue Sound. And our lab was a part of monitoring different aspects of how it performed over time from the time it was restored. I was also really involved in K-12 outreach. So with the goal of increasing STEM literacy in our local schools. If you're not familiar with the area, this part of Eastern North Carolina has the North Carolina State Marine Lab. So CMAS, Center for Marine Sciences, UNC's Marine Lab, Duke Marine Lab, NOAA, Marine Fisheries. It's pretty much a little pocket of marine science at the coast, or a pocket of Chapel, or the research triangle at the coast. And so one of the ways we did this was through both hands-on activities. So you can see in this first image, there's a group of kindergartners, it's very cute, demonstrating how increased impervious surfaces, AKA these Legos, the more that you put in there, the more you runoff you got into your watershed, just when you sprayed it with water. We used food coloring as pollutants. And then we taught them, and then we showed them how if you add stormwater control measures, AKA some sponges, that you can kind of mitigate this runoff going into our waterways. I also did a lot of engagement with K-12 and non-traditional educators through the Scientific Research and Education Network, or SIREN, and this trained researchers in creating lesson plans on their research that still met North Carolina grade standards. So these educators could then take them back to the classroom and teach about the work that's being done at the coast, but still meet the grade standards that the state sets out for them. And that brings us to now. So I joined Delaware Coastal Programs a little less than 4 months ago. I actually attended my first CIB STAC meeting during my first week here. So it's a little bit very, very, very new at the time. I've got my footing a little bit more now. And so coming out of my undergraduate and graduate work, I had about 10 years of experience working in salt marsh and estuarine environments, and my interests were strongly focused on participating and facilitating applied coastal research in support of science-based decision-making. So when I saw the research coordinator position with DCP came available, it was a really exciting opportunity to pursue that interest and also make the shift from Southeast, where I've been for the past 6 years, into the Mid-Atlantic. And so just to talk a little bit about the National Estuarine Research Reserve System and how that's useful as a CIB staff member. As I mentioned, my role with the system is the research coordinator. And for those who may not be familiar, the NEARS system is a network of 30, soon to be 31 coastal sites designated to protect and study estuarine systems across the US. So we have the East Coast, the West Coast, Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico, and the Great Lakes. And this is through a partnership with NOAA. So it can either be through universities or state systems. And NOAA provides funding and national guidance while we actually manage the sites. So the Delaware NEARS is part of DENREC's coastal section, and it's a 2-component reserve. So we have St. John's Reserve, which is south of the Air Force Base in Dover, and the Blackbird Creek Reserve, which is located in Townsend. And as the research coordinator for the Delaware NEARS, it provides me with a really extensive network across the country of subject matter experts in all aspects of coastal research and management. So although the Inland Bays are not part of our reserve system, I do have this really great network of other reserves that I can draw on for support. And I just wanted to mention a couple projects that we have going on in the Inland Bays currently or upcoming. The first is our green bulkhead, and this is led by a scientist on my team, Taylor Beck. And this is a pilot project to assess a green bulkhead's ability to restore some of the ecological function that you lose when you install traditional bulkheads, so that gray infrastructure. And it follows, so you can see here, it's kind of like a marsh organ. And you have native marsh vegetation added to these PVC pipes with the goal of kind of adding some complexity to the system and restoring some of that function. So this is currently a pilot study and it's modeled after the Maryland Inland Bays green bulkhead. And we currently are monitoring it for nectin, vegetation, benthic epifauna, water quality, substrate gain and loss, scour measurements, and eDNA. And then we have a project upcoming that we'll be working with DNREC's Wetland and Waterways section to update some regulations. So marina regulations require benthic community assessment from the location of a future marina or published data from a representative project site. So the purpose of our benthic macroinvertebrate study or project is to update the representative data available to better inform regulatory decisions. And so as you can see, we have sites located all throughout the Inland Bays where we'll be doing this sampling. And the benthic macroinvertebrate data will be assessed for frequency, abundancy, diversity measurements using a rapid bioassessment technique. And that's all I have for y'all. Thanks for listening. Happy to answer any questions. I'm just starting to get my feet wet here, 4 months in, and I finally have my head screwed on straight, I think, but still getting there. But I'm very excited about all of the applied coastal research we're currently doing and that we have on the horizon, and excited to be involved with the CIB STAC.
That's awesome, Molly. Well, I can see why they hired you. I think your graduate and undergraduate research is directly applicable to Delaware, and you're obviously going to be a great fit. So very interesting stuff that you have done and that you've got on the books for going forward. So any questions or comments for Molly? All right, hearing none. I'm not sure if you're still too much involved with doing K-12 outreach, but we've recently hired a STEM educator. So I might have her contact you to learn about some of the things that you had done when you were in North Carolina. Maybe some good ideas for her.
Sounds great.
Wonderful. Well, next we're going to go in transition. So thank you to both of our new members. I hope folks please engage with them if you see opportunities for collaboration. It's nice that we get to know a little bit more about them now. But we're going to transition and have Brittany Sturgis from DNREC share with us a little bit about the Delaware Targeting and Planning Tool, or DTAP. So for those of you who are new, this may be a completely new topic for you, but for those of you who have been engaged with the STAC for a while, you've heard us talk about different modeling efforts. So DNREC is basically has been building this new tool. It's similar to something that's been done in the Chesapeake for looking at watershed loadings. And so I'm going to let Brittany give a little bit of background on this, but really tell us really how this tool can be used, how it might help support efforts in the Inland Bays. So Brittany, I'm going to let you take things over.
All right, thanks, Jen. I'm just going to let you keep rolling with it. So that's a good,
no,
quick little summary.
It's your job.
Let me see if I can share. How is that? You can see the whole thing. How do I do? There we go. Okay, can you see that? Okay. So I am first introduce myself, Brittany Sturgis. I am with DNREC, Delaware Department of Natural Resources Environmental Control, Watershed Assessment and Management section. So my role has been to help with the development of this tool we are calling DTAP, which is a little confusing. It's a lot like the child immunization word, but it was the best acronym that we could come up with. So it is a tool. It's been in development a couple years now, and I will jump into it. And just to warn everyone, if you are at the non-point source partner meeting a couple months ago, this is a similar presentation, but excuse me, added a little bit more data, but I wanted to make sure to get a background to everyone. So I know we have people here that are not super familiar with it. So to start off with, this map that I'm highlighting again, some of these graphics that I show, you don't have to read, you don't have to get into it, just more so the visual appeal is why I included them. But this one I wanted to show how many stream segments we have that are listed for some sort of impairment. So all of the red areas, that means that the segment is polluted with some sort of contaminant, bacteria. There's a variety of things, you can look at nutrients, and we're looking for the green. So you can see it's majority red and a little bit of green, part of the segments that are not listed for some sort of impairment. So with all of this water quality information, this led to the development of TMDLs, total maximum daily loads, which are what we call pollutant diets throughout the state. And a lot of us are familiar with these colorful graphics that we have. The biggest thing I wanted to highlight was that most of the state is listed for some sort of TMDL. So meaning that we have to reduce these pollutants or contaminants in order to make our water healthy again. This is on the left is nitrogen, middle is phosphorus, and to the right is bacteria. So again, you don't have to read it, just see that most of the state is listed with some sort of TMDL. So how do you address these TMDLs, or how do you improve your local water quality? That's a question that we all have, we're all interested in. So we wanted to come up with a way to help us accelerate some of this water quality, or how to improve some of this water quality. First thing we need to do, we need to understand what's actually going on in the waterways. We have a lot of real-time monitoring, but we wanted a way that we could model what's going on and understand the impacts of potential BMPs or best management practices. So it became important to us to monitor and create a model. And that's how this DTAP came about. So we are wanting to model and then evaluate the impacts of potential projects. Sorry, I get my words mixed up a little bit here. But the main idea was to have a modeling tool where we don't rely on real monitoring data, so we can model something in the future and play around with different numbers and different goals and see what kind of impact that has on local water quality. So Jen had mentioned this is similar to a tool called CAS, the Chesapeake Assessment Scenario Tool. And for those familiar with the Chesapeake Bay world, this is the Chesapeake Bay model. So it's one of the most complex models that have been developed for water quality. We knew that it's a very helpful tool, but it's also very overwhelming for users. Unless you use it very often, but there's so much data and information and helpful things to pull from it. But we wanted to use this as a base and come up with some sort of web-based tool that can model nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, and we also added bacteria. But we wanted to start with this tool and figure out how can we customize this for Delaware. And I had a lot of familiarity with this tool, so that's why I was pulled into this project. And we were able to really dig into what worked for Delaware's needs and what didn't. So we hired the contractor that developed this CAS tool, and that's where the Delaware Targeting and Planning tool came about. So we've been working with her for, like I said, a couple years now. Our contract we're into the second phase, which I will get more into in a little bit. Some of the highlighted goals of DTAP that we really wanted to address. We wanted a Delaware specific tool, so not just Chesapeake Bay, because the CAS tool does model parts of Delaware, but it's just the Chesapeake Bay portion of our state. So this DTAP will model the entire state, and it will identify background loads and help us pick BMPs to achieve some of these water quality standards or TMDLs that are in place. We also wanted to model the edge of stream load, which is I will also get into because that can be a little bit complicated, but we wanted to model a certain load for nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, and bacteria because we have a lot of bacteria TMDLs. And again, we want to do this outside of the Chesapeake portion of Delaware, so statewide. And then we wanted to see if we could come up with a way to help us identify some of these projects that we can implement to help us meet here's the alphabet soup, TMDLs, WIPs, PCSs, so total maximum daily loads, the watershed implementation plans that we've developed, and pollution control strategies that have been developed all throughout the state. One of the biggest things I wanted to point out and really drive home is this DTAP tool. It's intended to be a modeling tool, not a regulatory tool. So we are not looking to enforce any sort of permitting at this point. We haven't had any discussion about that, so I don't see that happening in the future, but this is more so to help us come up with BMPs and help us see if we're making any progress in terms of meeting some of our TMDLs or some of our watershed plans, and if we're trending in the right direction. So models are only as good as the data that you put into them, and we understand this is not going to be 100% accurate, but it can really help us understand trending and if we're heading in the right direction. So again, not a regulatory tool. So some of the biggest differences for those familiar with CAST, I mentioned this a couple minutes ago, there's two different ways to model when you're using these sort of watershed loading models. There's an edge of stream version, there's edge of tide. CAST can do both, but we have focused on edge of stream, and that means the load that reaches the edge of a small stream. Edge of tide is the load that reaches the tidal portion of the bay. So that's more so a hydrodynamic model that it has been mentioned, and I think CIB's sounds like really cool to hear the RFP that's coming out soon to develop this hydrodynamic model. But our model is more focused on the TMDLs and all the listings that we have for small streams. So we wanted a tool that will help us identify the loads that end up in the streams rather than the middle of bays. Also mentioned previously, this is a statewide model and not just a specific portion, but we can also use various scales in this model, which you'll see a map in a minute or two. Again, modeling bacteria, that's a new one. So this is the first time bacteria has been modeled that we know of in this context. And it's been pretty gruesome to try and figure out, but we think we're headed in the right direction. Then we also want to simplify some of the inputs into this model, because CAST, like I said, can be very overwhelming. And we think we did a pretty good job of simplifying. So I would just want to go simply step by step. How does DTAP work? This is very simplified, and I figure we can jump into more detail if there's more questions, but I want to keep this pretty upper level to start off with. So first thing we do, a user in the tool defines a year and geographic scope. And I included this slide. This is from our contractor, Olivia Devereux. She presented to the STAC in February 2022, and she really got into how the model works. So she's the brain behind the modeling components. So if there's detailed modeling questions, can try my best to answer, but just warning you, I'm not the modeler that has come up with this. So a lot of the information about the actual modeling is in her presentation. But basically what you do is you can pick out a year between 1990 and 2025. And that year is considered your base condition. So that incorporates all the land use, all various components that are involved with that particular year. So you pick a year, then an average hydrological condition is used for all years. So it doesn't incorporate what that rainfall was like for that particular year that you picked, because we wanted to really hone in on the impact of BMPs and land use versus hydrology. Because if it's a wet year versus dry year, that can really impact the loads that ends up in the stream. So we chose to use an average hydrological condition amongst all the years, so we can get rid of that component of wet year versus dry year. The next thing that you pick besides your year is the geographic scale, as I had previously mentioned. So this is some example, or these are some examples of the different scales that you can look at in DTAP. So you can look statewide. The chart to the left is, let's see, major basins. So we have 4 major basins in the state. You can look at the historic watersheds, that's the light gray lines. Or you can look in municipalities, impacts to the municipalities themselves. And that's that tan color that you can see throughout the state. That's the municipalities. It's a new one that CAST has not done in the past. You can also look in the middle keep saying the wrong word, but the middle image, the orange lines are Huck 8 scale and the blue lines are Huck 10. And then the image to the right, the purple lines are Huck 12. So you can really hone in on certain areas. And then the light blue lines all the way to the right is NHD and catchment layer, which is super particular and really tiny areas. So you can look statewide impacts to BMP's water quality, or you can really look at a little particular NHD catchment area if that's what you're interested in. So after you pick out your base conditions, your year and your geographic scope, you then are able to apply BMPs. So we have condensed the list of available BMPs So in CAS, there's over 1,000 options for various BMPs and very overwhelming, but we have condensed that list down to 26 BMPs. And we are in the point now where we are making sure these all make sense. So we've been playing around with the modeling just to make sure that it's modeling correctly. But for example, cover crops, there are over 1,000 options for BMPs and CAS, depending upon the type of cover crop, the time it was planted, how it was planted. But in DTAP, we just have one generic cover crop BMP option. Good and bad that it's only one, but we found it to be more easy and intuitive to use the tool if we really condense these BMPs down. So to the left is the suite of BMPs listed by sector. So the green BMPs are ag, yellow are developed sector, blue are natural, and the gray are septic BMPs that are all available options in DTAC. To the right is a little guide that we're currently developing that will help users understand how BMPs fall into these condensed list of options. For example, I have listed forest buffer and grass buffer, and with all of our various programs that we all work in, there's so many different names for the same BMP. So we're going to have a list of synonymous BMPs and how that falls into the DTAP list of BMPs. So it's an easy user guide to see where, if you're looking to see the impact of NRCS practice, you can look it up in this guide and see what BMP that falls under DTAP. So along with entering BMPs, I wanted to put this info out there that you can either enter BMPs manually in Excel, you could do it one by one in the tool itself, or you can also use these default statewide data that are available to us. So DNREC has previously collected BMP statewide data, or we've expanded to statewide in the last couple of years, but particularly in the Chesapeake world, we put out a solicitation for any partner BMP implementation data, and we incorporate that into a new BMP tracking and reporting tool that we have. And Olivia helped develop that tracking tool. So fortunately, DTAP and that tracking tool talk to each other. So we're able to pull all the reported BMPs from that tool into DTAP. For example, you can look at statewide loads and enter, I want to see all the BMPs available from the year 2020, plop that in and hit report, and it'll apply all of those and spit out a loading rate. But a caveat is this BMP tracking and reporting tool, we still have major gaps in data. This has been a huge undertaking to try and gather, especially historic BMP data with our partners, and that's going to be a priority for us in the future. But for right now, there are still major gaps with more of the historic BMPs. The last couple of years look pretty good, but wanted to forewarn everyone that if you do decide to use this statewide data that are available, there's gaps. So models are only as good as the data that you put into them. Just so everyone's aware. So once you define your year, your scope, and what BMPs you want to apply to a scenario is what we call, DTAP then has the ability to calculate loads. So how it does that, it calculates the loads and it spits out different reports. So these are the different reports that are available within the tool. You can look at the loads themselves for nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, and bacteria. It'll compare two different options or two different scenarios to see what the impacts of the projects were. You can look at land use, so you can compare land use different years. You can look at the BMPs that were included in the scenario that you selected, and then the input file and submitted versus credited, or more so just to check how the model is functioning itself. So that was a ton of information. I wanted to walk everyone through a simple project to show what the capabilities of the tool itself are. This is just one minor component of it, but I thought it was applicable for this meeting, and it's a similar project that I presented at the MPS meeting. So for example, what would be the impact of converting 500 acres of crops to forest buffers in the Inland Bays Basin in 2022? So I'm going to walk you through some screenshots of what the tool looks like itself in order to get to the answer of this question. So first and foremost, this is what the tool looks like. There's a landing page. I wanted to highlight that there's a login in the upper right. So this tool is not accessible to everyone in the public. You have to have a login and password that is cleared through our DNREC team first. see, next slide. No. This is what it looks like. Again, you don't have to understand or read all the information that's presented here, but wanted to highlight when you're coming up with your base scenario, this is what the screen looks like. You input a base condition and then also a scale. So here's where you can choose statewide, major basin, hub 12, all your different geographies you can select. So for this project, I selected this Inland Bays basin, and that's highlighted here to the left. Then once you come up with your scenario, this is how you add BMPs. Again, you don't have to read all the details, but this major basin scale, Inland Bays, this is the forest buffer BMP type. Then you can select what land use this is going onto. So this is going onto cover crops or cultivated crops, and then the unit is 500 acres. So all you do is hit save. You have to run a scenario. So a big thing with the model is it runs, you can tweak things, and then there's actually a run button and you get to see it work right before your eyes. So run the tool and you come up with a list of reports. So I went through all what these reports can show. And this is an example of a loads report for that scenario that I just created of converting 500 acres of cultivated crops to forest buffer. So it's all an Excel sheet, which is nice. There's a ton of tabs along the bottom. So this first tab is an acres tab, and we like to use this to make sure that the model is working correctly. So you could see my ribbon is blocking the top of my screen. So I'm gonna move that, but you can see here's the acres added up. This is showing that there's less negative. So we are removing 500 acres of cover crops and we are cultivated crops, and we are adding 500 acres of forest. So that makes sense. That looks good. So next we're going to move along these bottom tabs into the different loads. There we go. So next we're jumping into the nitrogen loads. I highlighted in red what the impacts are for this project. So you could see that we have a 60,920 pound per year reduction of loads in cultivated crops when you remove those 500 acres. But when you add 500 acres of forested buffer, you have a little bit of a load increase, but what you do is you add those two. So you can do this whole same process for nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, and bacteria. And that's what the impact of this project would be. So it's not as easy just hitting a button of here's this project, what are the loads, and it spits it out. We've used this scenario option where you compare two different scenarios and you actually have to end up subtracting, adding, because you can do a lot of different things when we have it set up that way. So in summary, this is what the impact of that project would be for nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, and bacteria for converting 500 acres of crops to buffers. I wanted to point out the bacteria component. It's still in development. Like I said, it was very complicated. We've made a lot of progress, and I will show you a map in a second. Some other ways to utilize the tool other than just looking at specific BMP projects. You can take hypothetical BMPs and also these in hypothetical BMPs and run through these scenarios and really see what the impacts are to land. You can look at trends toward meeting a lot of these plans or TMDLs that we've established, which is the main reason why DTEP was developed. You can do what I'm calling a hotspot analysis, and I can show you that in a second. And you can also look at land use change. So I've been playing around with some different options that we have in DTEP, and I should probably give a little summary of where we are in terms of this development of the tool. We've had it for a couple months now to play around internal testing. So we are trying to almost break the tool to see if there's any bugs or errors in it. So we're coming up with some pretty crazy scenarios or things to do and seeing how the tool functions. And so far, so good. We haven't found any major errors or complications in the tool. So this is all draft data. I've been playing around with this the last day or two, but I thought it was a good way to visualize some of the functionalities or options in the tool. This is looking at land use, so pure land use. There's no actual BMPs applied to these. So this is looking what's actually on the land. I'm looking at the loads between 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020, and I broke it down by the different sectors. So this is the acreage right now. You can also look at the loads, but I wanted to show, and made sense to me, the difference in the acreage of the different sectors. So in ag, in summary, we have lost quite a bit of acreage. Develop has gone up, which all makes sense. Natural, which includes forest, wetlands, that has also gone down. So I'm playing around with these different scenarios to make sure that the numbers make sense, everything's functioning. And the grand total down here, that also confirms the tool is working, because the number of acres throughout the Inland Bays portion, I should mention too, this is just Inland Bays. It has not changed, but the total has not changed. It's just how the different sectors are made up have definitely shifted. This is a quick little GIS analysis we are also doing to look at the output of the model. This is looking at 2022, I think it was 2022, the land use, looking at the loads throughout the state at the Huck 12 scale. So you could see the left is total nitrogen, the darker red is the hot spots. That makes sense to me. And again, you can change how this is displayed, but this is just a rough and dirty. Let me look at this visually rather than numbers. So on the left is nitrogen, middle is phosphorus. Again, the Chesapeake portion is a little bit of our hot spot, and sediment is more so in the middle of the state. So these are some of the different functionalities of the tool. And then this was an interesting one that we are now digging into. This is bacteria. So mentioned earlier, it's a lot more complicated than what we anticipated. Olivia is having to come up with some pretty interesting ways to model these data. So this is, again, draft form, but visually, this is what it looks like at a catchment, I think, NHD level, some of the hot spots for the bacteria. And it was really interesting for me to see. So some of the next steps, like mentioned, we are just developing the model now. So first and foremost, we want to make sure it's functioning. Working on all the bugs or internally testing. Our next phase is to create an optimization tool, is what it's called. So it will help us, we'll be able to select what are your priorities in terms of, I want a low cost BMP or want a really effective BMP in this particular area. And it's going to be buttons that you can click, or it's going to pop out with a few different options of, I have a priority of reducing this pollutant in this watershed that's the most cost effective, and hit go. And DTAP will pop out with, I think, 4 or 5 different options that it will identify, and the user can then go through those options and pick what best suits their priorities. So that development just began and extends for the next couple of years, but we're really excited to have that component that takes some of the heavy load off of the user and gives us options to play with. So with that, I'm going to end with questions. I know it was a ton of info, but I'd be happy to get into more detail if anyone has anything in particular.
Thank you, Brittany. You did a great job with that. I'm excited to see the progress that has been made. And I know back when I worked at DENREC, collecting the data of all the BMP implementation was a headache then, but you guys have made so much progress. I see Christoph has his hand raised. Let's go to him for questions first.
Yes, just a quick question, Brittany. So are we going to wait for the optimization tool to be developed until this is available for users, or are we close to having the preliminary product available and start doing what we can with that?
Yeah, so we have a handful of DEMREC users that we have given usernames to, and a lot of them have worked with the tool and it's been functioning for what they want to use it for. So next couple of weeks, I'd say we're ready to put it out maybe to a couple of our partners that will actually use the tool. We don't want to send it out to anyone and everyone, but have some partners play around with it. So that was a question with CIB. Is there a particular user that you think would be able to utilize this most and really play around with the tool and help us identify any bugs before anything is finalized? So
we can certainly help you identify those.
Yep.
So yeah, we'd be more than happy to partner with you on that.
Yep,
Thank
I'll
you.
reach out.
Mm-hmm.
Deb, would you like to contribute?
Great talk, Brittany. I really like it. And I think this is quite exciting in terms of how different components come together and contribute to modeling, and modeling help us to perhaps a longer BMP goals. So I ask about, I work in phosphorus entirely, so I have no knowledge of other aspect. For the phosphorus loading, what form of phosphorus you're using?
Ooh, I am not the modeler, so I could
I'm
happy
sure
to
it's-
pass along info. Go ahead,
I
Jen.
imagine it's total phosphorus.
Yeah.
Okay. And total in terms of like
Ortho P plus sediment, you know,
some
bound P.
extracts on the method, right? Like the microwave digested total P.
They're not really probably looking at things at that scale. It's much more of a holistic approach, but yeah, Brittany could probably have you go directly to Olivia Devereux, who does the modeling, to answer that question specifically. But my past experience with the Chesapeake Bay was that they really were not looking at things broken down, probably for phosphorus even more than nitrogen. Nitrogen might have had nitrate, nitrite. Yeah, Megan has said
Agreed.
total phosphorus. So it's everything added together.
All right, thank you.
Brittany, I know you're probably not at this place yet, but we all know for Chesapeake World, you mentioned you do the data call of the BMPs that have been implemented. You submit that to the Bay program. Then they tell you if you're on track for achieving your various TMDLs or not, what kind of progress you're making. Is that your intent? I know you even showed us the loads of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment for all the various watersheds in Delaware. Have you been for the other locations, or do you plan to compare that to what the TMDL reductions called for?
Maybe eventually down the line, that is what kind of brought this idea about it first, is we wanted to know, are we heading in the right direction? Then we realized we don't even have baseline information. So this is taking
the model that was used to develop the TMDL on the Inland Bays, for example, in the 90s, you know, different data sets, different assumptions, but you could choose that kind of 1990 baseline period, see what the loads were then. I assume we have the 40-60% reductions. You know, we could calculate what that number should be and then run it for current times. Are we there?
Right. Ideally, we would be there to be able to click that button, but the BMP information is the biggest gap, right? So we have these background loads, and sometimes BMP implementation, we need to implement all these BMPs, but you don't see the impact to the groundwater or the surface water for decades. So
right.
We do some real life, you know, water quality monitoring that shows us some information, but we really need that BMP layer on top to see what the overall impacts are. So first and foremost, we need to establish this base model that standardizes the model throughout the state, right? Because we have these little pockets of modeling in different areas of the state, but they look at things differently. So we wanted to come up with a way to look at this state throughout the same way. And then we can work on getting that base model correct, making sure it's functioning, and then applying the BMPs to see how close we are to meeting those TMDL. So in an ideal world, yes, that's where we'll be. May take a lot of effort to get there, but we're knocking it off little by little, and we're getting there.
So I guess another question I had is, how can the center really kind of engage with using DTAP or getting DTAP to the place where it's needed? Because you mentioned data gaps. I'm not sure if they're providing you with any information about the reforestation projects that they're doing, or any of the other types of BMPs that may be within DTAP now.
Yep. So we aren't exactly there yet with collecting. Well, we do collect the statewide data. Other partners within DEMREC do, but in terms of collecting throughout the state and really incorporating that into DTAP, we can play around with those scenarios yet, but we first need to make sure that the model is functioning properly and in spitting out loads that make sense. So maybe we can input some of the CIB BMP information and hit go and make sure that those load outputs really are working. That makes sense. But
yeah,
we do definitely plan to utilize some of the BMP information from partners in the near future. And we do have a pretty big solicitation for BMP information Chesapeake wide, but we're also expanding that to statewide. I'm not sure if partners have really started to submit statewide data, but that's a really great way to work together in the future, is to get that statewide BMP information.
Yeah, I mean, I know the center with their water quality efforts, you know, they've got the network of continuous data sondes throughout the Inland Bays. They have been really trying to use that information for some of the 305B, 303D listing efforts. So I imagine when they're ready too, they would probably really very much want to provide that information. I don't want to speak for them, however, but just having known what we've discussed at these STAC meetings in the past, I think they would be keen to be a partner in that.
Yeah, there's a lot of great ways to use this tool. So we really want to be careful about making sure it's what everyone needs and it's working properly. So we're really trying to test it before we go to the next level and find out that it's not useful to partners because of X. So we're
Right.
slowly testing and getting our feet wet with sending it out to partners. So looking forward to
And I see in the chat, Aaron has chimed in that DDA would like to be able to test. So he asked, should they reach out to you to?
Sure. Yep.
There you go. And
I'll put my email address in the chat too, if anyone wants to.
perfect, thank you. And Megan has dropped a link in. This is, you want to explain what this is, Megan? It's a DNREC
Sure.
tool.
For those of you who are in DNREC, DNREC already really tracks all of the tree types of BMPs. And you can put in there exactly where you've planted trees, how many, the density. So it's a great way of getting Brittany all of that information about forest resources across the state.
Yep, and that's
it's already there.
So yeah, great example of a partner that we just established. So we just met with this Teddy team to make sure that when the time comes, we'll be able to get that BNP information that they get and that our tree planting BNP aligns with some of the information that they have. So that's where we are with everything, is reaching out to partners, making sure the tool makes sense for how they utilize their programs.
Great, that's good to hear. Any other comments or questions for Brittany? All right, thank you so much, Brittany. I really enjoyed hearing where you guys have got into with this and excited to see what comes next.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we're going to go in transition. So we have on our agenda something we decided to do a little bit differently. Megan and I were chatting and we came up with this idea to have a panel focus on coastal resilience. And the goal was to really, we wanted to hear from people who work in different aspects, from whether it's state government, academic programs, people who work in nonprofit groups, or even in private industry, to see how they're engaging with doing coastal resiliency work and figuring out really what should the CIB be considering for how do they prioritize their living resources and shoreline restoration projects that they're engaged in the inland bays. So I wanted to take a second, and hopefully all of our panelists are on. I'm going to start introducing these folks because I know some of them weren't able to join us in the beginning. So we have Christophe Tillou. We heard from him earlier, the Executive Director for the Center for the Inland Bays. Ashley Norden, who is a member and has been with us. She is on and part of this panel. We also have Danielle Swallow, who is with the Sea Grant program at the University of Delaware. Danielle, are you here with us yet?
Yep, I'm here.
Hello, thank you for joining us.
Yep, happy to be here.
And Ram Mohan, who is a STAC member. I know he was coming back from vacation. Ram, are you here yet? Hopefully he'll be joining us within a few minutes. If not, so Ram is with, sorry, what is his program? His Anchor. So he's the private industry aspect. And then Will Helt. Will, are you with us? Will is with the Nature Conservancy.
Good morning, Jen. I'm here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. So I wanted to provide each of you an opportunity to just quickly first introduce yourself and what your role is in your organization and how you're engaged in coastal resiliency work. And then also tell us what resilience means to you. So why don't we start with Christophe? We'll go down kind of in the order that I've introduced you in, and then when Ram comes, we'll have him chime in.
Good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Christophe Tillou, the Executive Director at the Center for the Inland Bays, a former Secretary at DNREC, a former Director of the Energy and Environment Office in the District of Columbia. And I've worked on coastal resilience issues for what seems like a century, and you might believe it actually. But at any rate, working with, for example, the Heinz Center in Washington on a coastal resilience strategy, working with folks in the insurance industry, both the retail side and the reinsurance side, academics at Wharton, TNC, and a host of others to see if there isn't a consensus about what's going on in our coastal areas, and more importantly, if there's a consensus on what to do about it. And there is a lot of consensus out there. Where we have problems are with others players, and certainly those who have political sensibilities like insurance commissioners at the state level and others. But for me, resilience is the ability to take a punch and be able to stand up and function afterwards. And for us in the inland bays, that would look like living shorelines, that would look like restored salt marshes, and longer term, that would look like room to roam. So the opportunity for our natural system to continue to exist unencumbered by the artificial boundaries created by development around our shoreline. So that's the quick and dirty.
Thank you. I like that ability to take the punch and keep on going. We'll go next to Ashley, but as she's doing that, Megan, can you drop your link to the Jamboard into the chat? Megan has created this Jamboard for us. So if you guys hear something or have a question as we're hearing from our panelists, this would be a great place for us to kind of collectively engage with each other throughout this panel to see what kind of ideas are coming up and for us to keep track of some of these thoughts too. Megan, did you want to add anything else to the idea of using the Jamboard?
If you have not used Jamboards before, you'll want to go over to the left-hand side of your screen, and one of those little icons says sticky note. And basically, it's just a virtual Post-it note. You click on the sticky note and you can add it anywhere on the Jamboard and you can type right into it. So don't worry about spelling or anything. We're really just trying to capture our collective knowledge. So every question that we ask the panelists is a different page on the Jamboard. So the first one that you should come to is, what does resilience mean to you?
Awesome. Thank you, Megan, for setting that up. I think that'll be a neat way for us to collect some of these thoughts. Ashley, on to you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Dr. Ashley Norton. I am the program manager at the Delaware Coastal Management Program. I've been in that position just for a little over a year now. My background was actually coastal science, very like remote sensing based up at the University of New Hampshire, but I got involved with their coastal program. And they have a really strong track record of working with communities on coastal resilience, similarly in a small state like in Delaware, right? A really tight-knit community. So I have some experience in New England. And then when I came to DENREC, I actually worked in the shoreline and waterway management section, which does a lot more implementation of projects and maintaining the shoreline, regulating parts of the shoreline, dredging and beneficial use. So I kind of had this science background and then this very practical project-based background. Coming into this position, what the Delaware Coastal Management Program does, we have various resilience projects. We have a focus on community resiliency, and I would say that that's something that I've really evolved in how I look at resiliency, right? It's empowering and helping build capacity for communities to respond and to bounce back, as Christoph said, right? So while also working on this larger framework with state and federal regulations and resources, right? Helping to get those resources where they're needed in communities. But the projects we have are the Resilient Communities Partnership. So every year we award at least one community money to work on a specific resilience issue in their town. It's usually technical assistance. So for example, we helped Fenwick Island develop a resiliency plan. We also are working on climate action plan implementation. And you guys know there's been a lot of legislation recently about how that exactly will get implemented, but my program particularly helps with the technical assistance of that as well, right? Updating sea level rise, updating the climate and temperature scenarios that will be used by folks like CIB and other members on the STAC to look at climate change. I guess another thing for what I see as resiliency is also equity, right? There's a lot of focus and resources being put into coastal resiliency across the country right now, but without long-term planning, how do those resources get distributed equitably, right? So that's another big part of resilience that I've come around to. So,
thank you, Ashley. I think that's an important component to highlight and feature there. Danielle.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Danielle Swallow with Delaware Sea Grant.
I am a coastal hazards specialist. I've been with Sea Grant a little over 5 years. And my job is much like a community extension person, but for the marine side, I kind of work with communities to help them assess climate and weather risks and how to build resilience to those. And prior to coming to Sea Grant, I was actually in coastal programs at DNREC. I helped to run the Resilient Community Partnership for a while. But before that, I had an even longer career, 16 years or so at NOAA. And there I did a lot of different things, but including helping NOAA roll out a regional climate services program. So I'm very happy to join you today and talk about my favorite topic. I think often about resilience in the different ways that both Christoph and Ashley have described. But I also like to think about it as coping with change and disruptions, and essentially trying to minimize the length and severity of disruptions when they occur. So, in a natural environment aspect, it might look like, trying to minimize the time it takes for our floodplain and our wetlands to drain out, or for nesting habitat, nesting activities to resume. Or with physical infrastructure, it might look at the length of time before a roadway that's been inundated is back in service. And the longer these disruptions occur, the more they tend to impede people's everyday and normal functions. So trying to reduce those disruptions in some form or fashion, I think, is a key goal of resilience. Thanks.
Thank you, Danielle. I think those are important points, the length and the severity of the disruption. Ram, I see you've joined us. So I understand that you are technically on vacation and just returned from some travel. So thank you for making time for us today. We're just having each of our panelists introduce themselves and tell us what resiliency looks like to them.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me today. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Ram Mohan. I'm a senior partner with Anchor QEA. We're consulting engineers and scientists, and we have about 20 offices around the country. I sit here in Rehoboth Bay, and I've previously led our company's coastal and flood resiliency, and as part of that, helped develop the national policy for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for natural and nature-based features. Prior to that, I was leading the coastal resiliency for the National Academy of Sciences Marine Board, where we looked at what does coastal resiliency look at from a national framework perspective and how it differs between the 4 coasts, each including the 4th one being Great Lakes, and including the varying shorelines, the differing forces, and sliding scale of the forcing events when it comes to resiliency. Right now, in my latest, I was also chairman of the World Dredging Association. So one of my pet peeves is how to marry the dredged material, which is not a spoil. I always say that while I teach at Texas A&M. It is a material, a resource. And I think here in Inland Bays and throughout Delaware, as with many other regions, we have a unique capability to use this material as a resource to build up resiliency if done the proper way. And there are many challenges when we try to do that. And I often say, even here in Delaware, it's a lot easier to dredge and put material upland than to embark on a natural restoration or a ecosystem restoration project, because we can talk about that in the panel. I can go on about it. But one of the things we're doing at the EAB, which is my latest activity, it's the Environmental Advisory Board to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Chief of Engineers, part of the Army Science Board. We're looking at 2 things. One is, how do you define beneficial use and nature-based solutions, especially given the fact that they're both adaptable, flexible over time, and integrally connected to resiliency, but you don't have a hard engineering standard. And this is what the Corps struggles with. And we would be faced with that with any engineer having to design something and put a PE stamp on it. These flexible, adaptable systems don't have a certain design criteria. And that's one challenge. And the other challenge is valuing the benefits. So how do you put a value on the habitat benefits that often come with this? And we call them co-benefits in a national scale. So that's the second. It's very easy for the Corps to justify a breakwater when you have a very direct cost and benefit equation, whereas these projects have a lot of challenges. So to summarize, there are many ways to, I guess, assess resiliency. It differs. You don't always need an island or a wetland. There could be subaquatic features. They function equally well. So we have a number of tools, and I think our inland bays offer us a very nice, opportunity to kind of see what works, and we could maybe try a few things experimentally and learn from it as we go along. And we're also working with the Corps on what we call EW and Proving Ground, which is Engineering with Nature Proving Ground program. And as part of that, we're looking at both New Jersey, especially New Jersey coast, South Jersey, looking at this as a sort of like a playing ground. Like, let's put these different islands and different reefs and living shorelines and things of that nature, and see how nature responds to them and what kind of benefit we get over time. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you very much, Ram. It's nice to have you because you've got this perspective from working in other locations too. Will, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you're connected to resiliency work and what it looks like for you.
Great, thank you. So yes, I'm Will Helt. I work with the Nature Conservancy in Delaware as the Oceans and Coast Program Director. And though we're a relatively young program, we're thinking about how to maintain these productive coastal ecosystems and communities and help them adapt to our future climate change scenarios. And so I have to admit, I've been in Delaware, I think about 1 year now. So I'm new to the state, but with me, I bring, I guess, 7 or 8 years of coastal habitat restoration and monitoring. I worked for TNC in Rhode Island and the state of Rhode Island as well, doing restoration projects. And I love all the resilience answers we've gotten so far. I'm not sure if I have much to add, but I love the thought about helping bounce back, but thinking about through the lens of individuals, communities, infrastructure, and our natural coastal ecosystems. So, and again, I'm happy to be here and share the virtual panel stage with this panel. So.
Great. And I want to encourage if anybody who is participating and listening to this to go ahead and chime in, put some additional questions or build off of anything in the chat, as well as using the Jamboard. I think Megan is getting folks admitted to have access to that if they've been attempting. I wanted to go ahead and transition. We prepared a number of questions for the panelists, but we don't have to stick strictly to those if there's a point of interest that somebody else wants to jump on. But our next question was really having heard what how everyone is defining resilience, and it's that bounce back, but looking at it through a couple of lenses, including equity and the severity and the length of the disruption, and looking at the co-benefits of some of this work. How can we or should we collectively manage for resilience? So do one of you want to give me a raise of a hand if you want to start this one off? Christoph, go for it.
So I figured I'd start first and let everybody correct me as they do their responses. So, I'm happy to do that on everyone's behalf. But how do we collectively manage for resilience under changing environmental conditions? I think the first step is to predict and understand our vulnerabilities to the multiple impacts of climate change, and directing our attention, our policies at all levels of government and resources also at all levels of government to addressing those vulnerabilities. And picking up on a point that's been made before, I think beginning with those places where we are most vulnerable. And that's not just because of the climate risk and impacts that we face, but because of other economic and social vulnerabilities that magnify some communities' risk. Getting back to Ashley's point in particular, but something that others have reiterated. It's an all hands on deck challenge, and it is certainly a scientific and technical question for folks in a number of different disciplines, as Ram has helped us understand. But it is also very much a behavioral question, and then we layer on it the inevitable politics that come from the fact that people are economically disadvantaged by this inconvenient thing called climate change. And it is going to cause them to have widely varied responses to all of this. So, understanding the problem, which we're getting a much better handle on, and then investing in the behavioral side of this and figuring out how we can get those varying perspectives on how to solve the problem together to resolve it.
Thank you, Christoph. We don't have to go in the same order. But Ashley's ready. She's
But
ready.
I do have some things to add. So when I heard this question, I really focused on the collectively, right? So I think there are some important networks that we have in the state that CIB can plug into, that the rest of us in our organizations can plug into. Danielle, you'll be happy to say the first one is RASCL, the Resilient and Sustainable Communities League, which is a community of resilience practitioners in Delaware, right? And I think, Michelle Schmidt is certainly very involved in that. She's on the steering committee and everything, but that's a good way to make sure we're not duplicating efforts. There's also Delmarva groups, Restoration and Coordination Network for Delmarva, the Delmarva Adaptation Network. But then, so there's active coordination, then there's also sort of passive collaboration, right? I think a lot about that we don't have too many like long-term plans that everyone can work off the same framework to understand where different organizations can plug into the question, right? So, and that's something that at the state level, I certainly think about as a state agency looking at this. And I think that planning would have to take into account both science and economics, right? When we talk about political will, it changes minds a lot. I've realized as economics data, if we don't do certain things, we don't do it in an efficient way, these are the costs to the state and to the counties and homeowners, et cetera. So those are just my thoughts on the maybe practical side of things of collaborating.
You're getting some thumbs up from Kelly there. Danielle, Will, Ram, one of you like to contribute?
Sure. Yeah, I'm enjoying all these good thoughts that folks are sharing. I think I think you can't uncouple resilience from the social aspects, like the natural, the physical, the social, the economic, they all combine. And so, moving forward, we have to be thinking in a very comprehensive way about resilience. And we have to be always paying attention to future conditions. And updating our own management efforts as that science evolves and our understanding evolves of those future conditions. I think that's going to be really important, is that we're adaptive in our approaches. And Ashley's heard me talk a lot about this lately, and I think Will too. I'm really interested in Delaware trying to move forward on understanding risk thresholds better. And this means like both physical risk thresholds, like maybe like when the point at which wetlands convert to open water, or social thresholds, where people have had enough, of ongoing high tide flooding. How many days per month is too much, right? What are they willing to tolerate? And I think when we know those things, it establishes planning windows and helps us identify these tipping points in a way, like in our own communities. And that's important information, right? We can act then, we know kind of the window we can act within, and we may not be able to mitigate our way out of everything, but it kind of gives us a sense of like what's ahead. And I think that's hard, to reach some of that, to get that information. And I think in terms of particularly like the community risk thresholds, like people's risk perceptions and thresholds, that requires a lot of social science and surveying and engagement and listening. And we've barely scratched the surface on that, I feel like. So that's what I would end off with.
Danielle, I'm loving what I'm hearing from you, because those are some of the things that I've been talking about and hearing these types of ideas too. And I think obviously working in extension, you know, we got to talk to people and the people who are being impacted and understand some of their thought process to know what's important to them and how they really want to respond to what they're dealing with. So Will and Ram, what can you contribute? You want to go, Will? I see you unmuted.
Sure. Yeah, so first, I love these answers, and also that we're diving into the million or billion-dollar question right away here. I'll just share kind of from the ecological perspective, one approach broader TNC has taken, acknowledging that climate change is changing at increasing rates, is this whole idea of preserving the stage versus the actors. And so, thinking about site resilience, maybe a little bit more than ecosystem resilience. And this rings true on we just recently had a big push for resilient and connected landscapes on our terrestrial side, which which looked into which like geological or geophysical conditions were real drivers for productivity and biodiversity. And how do we preserve those areas, knowing that the habitats will rearrange, species will migrate, but that this protective geologic condition is preserved. And I feel like while that can't directly plug into our coastal sites, I think there are some principles that we can take for that we can preserve this stage for coastal ecosystem migration. And so we have looked into some attributes that create a more resilient marsh, or one that's more able to migrate along with the changing seas and changing conditions, and thinking about how can we prioritize some of those areas and those migratory marsh migration corridors, for example.
So I can add to that. I think there were some nuggets here that folks said. Doug coined the term self-healing. Will mentioned migration. So when I hear of resiliency, it's really this ability to bounce back and giving nature a better chance at that process of self-healing, right? So what we really need to do, and many parts of the country are doing this, is first of all assessing, what does resiliency mean, right? So defining it, first of all, and then assessing threats, whether that's subsidence, loss of habitat, increased flooding, and what is acceptable, whether it's environmental and social justice or loss of land. If loss of land is okay, if there's migration backwards in a corridor that's free, that permits that kind of migration. So maybe we don't lose resource, maybe a transformation. That may not be a bad thing. So oftentimes people, when they think of resiliency, they think of it's a hard line on the sand, right? We need to protect so things don't change. It's oftentimes the opposite. Like, how do we plan well so that things can migrate, and where needed, can we put systems in place that were there once upon a time? Like, if you look at, one of my favorite things is to look at Google Earth and go back in time. And many times, we dredged islands in the back bays to build land, right? So these islands at one time served a purpose. So can we go back, and even here in, right near Massey's, like, go back and look at the shoals, there's a reason they're shoaling. Could we build those up into habitats? That would change the hydrodynamics, and we need to study, what would that yield to nearby communities? And then we come up with this master plan. So, for example, we're working with the Commonwealth of Virginia to look at Hampton Roads and that area to come up with what we call a master plan. So essentially, it's like looking at things globally and seeing where does nature need our help, and what kind of help can we provide? And in our ideal world, what are the suite of those projects that we would develop? So once we have that, then we can use the Army Corps has a national tool called the NIOT. It's the National Natural Infrastructure Opportunities Tool. It's really connecting who has the resource versus who needs the resource, right? So we could form something like that for Delaware to say, this is where the material is coming from, is it clean, where can you use it? And this is where it needs, whether that's Muddy Neck in Little Asperman area or building a new island like Middle Island, so that has certain benefits. So I feel like it's, you know, when we talk about resiliency, one of the key concepts should be whatever we do, it should be self healing over time. So we shouldn't have to pump money into it over and over again. And secondly, it shouldn't cause an adverse harm elsewhere, right? So it's always a system-wide consideration. So when you look at a particular project, it is actually beneficial to the entire coast or the entire shoreline. And if you put material in one place and it naturally disperses over time, and this is done in the Mobile Bay and down south, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We could put material in one place that disperses and nourishes a nearby wetland or a shoreline.
Thanks, Ram. So I want to allow the flexibility for panelists to respond to what they hear each other say or what they're seeing in the chat too. So I think Ram picked up a little bit, or maybe he didn't even see what Doug had put in, but he started to say something very similar to Doug's comment about not necessarily trying to keep things the way it has been, but look to what it could be in the future, sort of that it's not drawing that line in the sand. And then I see Ashley has dropped a link into a tool that's similar to what Ram was talking about in Maryland. So I'll give it a pause if anybody wants to chime in and say anything that they had heard from another. Christoph.
Just quickly, I want to pick up on Ram's point about taking a holistic, in our case, watershed approach and view to these things, because there are a whole litany of potential solutions looking to the future and future conditions and allowing natural systems to adapt to the change that's coming. And we are 300 square miles. I mean, by a Corps of Engineers perspective, this is a pretty easy lift, but I think it's going to be necessary because we have a host of issues that are related to this. And it gets to your next question of, you know, how important are wetlands? Well, let me just say this: in Delaware, we are at risk of losing every single wetland that we have. And freshwater wetlands and non-tidal wetlands are providing very important service as well. And for all intents and purposes, now that the federal government is no longer there to help protect them for us, and our statewide threshold for engaging is so large that, you know, we have a freshwater wetland resource that's entirely at risk. And we know with sea level rise and subsidence what's happening with our salt marshes. There's no need to go into that in any great length, but we need a holistic view. And I'm speaking very parochially. I know some of you are representing larger jurisdictions and other concerns, but for the inland bays, we need to know what to do about stormwater. We need to know what to do about sea level rise. We need to know what to do about storm surges. We need to know what to do about flooding, regardless of where it's coming from, whether it's associated with surges or with large precipitation events. And I think that we're small enough and we're smart enough to be able to say the future of the inland bays watershed will look like this, given the impacts and insults that we can expect from climate change. And here is a plan to make it look like what it needs to be. And that's with all of then the benefit of social science and public engagement that others have talked about. And we need to get about doing that, because if we deal with this piecemeal, I don't think we're going to have very great success. And I would say for the state at large. So looking at the Bayside and all the rest of it, again, the state of Delaware is not so big and not so complex that we can't be addressing those questions on a comprehensive basis as well.
That was a great segue, Ram. So our next question was about how resilient wetlands can really help maintain and prolong the health and resilience of coastal communities. So any of our other panelists want to chime in and build off of what he has started?
I always like to say that nature's our best defense against nature. You know, that the fully intact, functioning natural floodplain, which wetlands are a part of, does an amazing job of providing so many services to our communities, you know, and it starts with being able to absorb and receive and discharge inundation on a daily basis with the tide, but also that excess inundation that might come from storms and heavy precip. And so when they're resilient, when they're healthy, that they are functioning at, you know, fuller capacity than if they're degraded, if they're being built upon, or, you know, marginal, you know, minimized in some form or fashion. I think of, like, wetlands just provide so many co-benefits, right? Like they do this great job with storm mitigation, for example, but then they're also providing water quality benefits and habitat and, soil structure in some cases and all kinds of things. So that's sort of a story I feel like it's important. We need to share that more, that, these wetlands are doing heavy duty, they're really workhorses for our communities.
And if the Corps of Engineers were asked to provide the protection that those wetlands are already providing us, it would be how much, Ram? A few $1 billion, probably?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And it really has a guidance, and that's actually I'm co-authoring. That should be coming up in 2 months or so. It's being reviewed by headquarters, and that's really a national guidance on thin layer placement of dredge material to restore wetlands. And this is a whole concept. You can construct a new wetland, or you can restore an existing one. And you can restore either in bulk by putting heavy material and planting over it, or you can do passively. And this concept of thin layer placement is kind of like reining the material in. So it spreads over the wetlands in 6 to 12 inch kind of thickness, and the vegetation comes back naturally over 2 to 3 growing seasons. So this is a nice way, and it could be repeated many times. That's another beauty of the technique. So if there are wetlands like in Muddy Neck of the Little Assoman area that needs a little bit of a lift, then a technique like this would be beneficial. But I agree with everything other panelists had mentioned. These are incredible resilient coastal systems that, if we do some minimal interventionist techniques, could return big benefits back to us, not only from its ability to function as filters from nutrients and other pollutants in the coastal zone, but also, helping, us provide with educational tools as well. These are great things to bring high school students or other community college students into action, and you have to, plan things and monitor things and study things and things like that. So I think the wetland restoration is probably our number one tool in the toolbox, and then we work from there on out.
We're starting to blend into our next question. So I just wanted to see, did anybody else have anything they wanted to add to that point, or should we go there? So the next question was really, how can we build that political will to keep adding wetlands to provide us that resiliency? And so Ram touched on education. I had some follow-up questions there related to, is it policies, incentives, or languages to be built into county or town ordinances, or HOA initiatives, financial and educational resources, and how do we do this with or without enforcement? So we'll kind of start going there. We can kind of bounce between some of those maybe specific ideas, but Ed asked too, who's responsible for financially paying for this if it's a service that is possibly benefiting the community, the whole. Will, I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, I just wanted to go because I wanted to steal Ram's thunder. I think he's probably going to say something similar, but so I know the Center for Inland Bays did a bit of an economic analysis of the value of the inland bays, and there's a lot of great content in there. I would argue to take it a step further and explicitly quantify or account for the co-benefits, as far as like carbon sequestration or provision of fish habitat production, and those other numbers that I think will even balloon the economic value of salt marshes even greater, and to help kind of tip that cost benefit scenario a little bit more, but also talk about in that kind of political will that there is so much inherent value in direct and indirect benefits of these salt marshes, and hopefully that will help drive further investment in their restoration and preservation.
I like what Ram was saying about these projects being an educational opportunity too, right? So not just for students, right, but also for HOAs, for town leaders and everything. I I know like up in Wilmington, right, there's the South Wilmington Wetland Park. It's a big restoration project. They work very actively to kind of share that out with neighborhoods in Philly and everything too, right? And that helps to see like, oh, this can be done. This is an asset, right? So pilot projects can do a really good educational service too.
And we do that with living shorelines and doing tours and those sorts of things to show people, A, what they look like, B, how they function, and C, how they're actually an amenity and a value to a community that frankly bulkheads don't provide. And certainly doing the same with wetlands projects. I think the economics is really a key element of this discussion in terms of getting political interest and making that case. And I think, again, we've got robust science. We've got a fair amount of good economic assessment of the value of these kinds of wetland resources. I think the challenge that many of us have, again, is on the social science. The behavioral side is how do we nudge people in the right direction and help them be comfortable that how we've done things in the past 30, 100 years is maybe not the way that we would want to proceed forward. And I think for a system like ours, it's maybe an easier sell. People may not come to the beach to enjoy the marshes and the bays and the watershed more broadly, but they know they're there. And people who live here certainly have appreciated all that they provide. To say that the goal of a resilience strategy is to keep those things around is a great one. And working with HOAs, I think, is another key element that folks have raised, as you did, Ashley. That and we're doing that. We're beginning to engage HOAs, which is a very difficult proposition, by the way. The leadership of those groups changes constantly, but to help them to appreciate the investments they can make in the watershed to assist us in dealing with these things. Looking longer term, this is a bit of a radical idea, but again, getting back to economics, there is going to be a time when the value of coastal property on the sides and edges of the inland bays is going to drop to zero. And that is getting to the thresholds that Diane Yell was talking about. One of the issues of thresholds is I can't tolerate it anymore. What do you do when you can't tolerate it anymore? Well, you move or you throw a fit. I don't know what the answer is. But there's another threshold there, and that is the point at which the insurance industry decides that we're uninsurable. There is that point at which, heaven help us, can't happen soon enough, frankly, that BlackRock and other real estate investors decide that pouring billions of dollars or trillions of dollars into these coastal environments may not be the good investment. The problem is they can drop that money and then run, and then the HOAs and the property owners have to deal with the consequences, hence the importance of working with them. But longer term, thinking about how we put a pool of resources together, not to buy the $10 million parcel right now to help with the migration or other natural benefits that we get from acquiring property, but to acquire it when its value is 1/10 of what it is now, anticipate that, and then have a strategic plan for investing to allow our natural system to evolve and to migrate.
Great thoughts, Christoph. Anybody want to comment, respond to that, or add to?
That was just a point in the chat. If not everyone's monitoring it, is there is a land use now, and how do we approach that land use and those owners with all of these, what we know is the ecological decision with the social challenge. And so I don't know of anyone across the country that has figured that answer out, but it is the big open question. So thanks, Claire.
Yeah, I can try to comment on that a little bit. I've been thinking about this a bit. I think sometimes we characterize our wetlands as state managed wetlands, and it divorces the person from having any ownership of that. If we rebrand our wetlands as community infrastructure, something that we all benefit from. And then I think of this at the HOA level. I was telling Christoph this the other day, an example in my own neighborhood. I'm in Lewis. My own neighborhood has a portion of our neighborhood that basically abuts to this Cape Henlopen State Park. And there was a new construction going in, even though we're an older community. And somebody, you know, and the black tarps go up, you know, to create a perimeter. And then somebody, that owner decided to go ahead and mow the wetlands that were even behind that perimeter, and just mow them down. Because, you know, maybe they're obstructing their view. And I saw this and I couldn't get their attention. And so I told my HOA about it. And first off, the HOA was somewhat reluctant to report him to the state because, you know, we don't want to be getting on bad terms with our neighbors, but they did confront this person. And, you know, and he's like, oh, my bad. Well, I said, that's not good enough, right? Like, they've just mowed down a piece of our infrastructure. These wetlands are helping all of our community stay dry in a way, right? By serving as, you know, absorbing inundation when it, you know, the wind blows a certain direction, and obviously the ecological benefits. And anyway, I feel like something's missing there, right? Like if we can get our HOA covenants to codify the fact that wetlands are community infrastructure, you know, maybe there's a little bit more of like this personal ownership. And then coupled with what I think the point's been really well made by Ashley and others about the economics, like we really need to better understand the economic value that wetlands bring. And I always think in terms of, there's lots of co-benefits. I think in terms of loss avoidance, you know, the avoidance of property damage from a significant event. So if we could codify that, quantify that, maybe we could start changing the conversation a little bit.
So can I chime in and ask, are there examples of how it has been codified in neighboring states, or maybe even within our own state, within an HOA that has been more proactive? Are we charting uncharted grounds here?
I think it's so hard because our HOAs are sort of their own little incorporated communities, so to speak, right? Like, and the folks that are, you know, in like doing the nice volunteer service of being on an HOA board, they're not necessarily coming to that with expertise in management of nature-based infrastructure. And then there's no real, that I could find, like really good solid enforcement. I mean, our county is not able to enforce these things. The state has a hard time enforcing some of this. So it's a burden in a way. And some, you know, and oftentimes the HOAs are inheriting the design, the engineering, you know, that was designed for them when a subdivision goes in place. And they're just not, they're behind the curve on understanding what it takes to maintain something. I don't know that I'm responding to your question very well, Jen, but.
No, but I think it exemplifies the education that's required for HOAs that are the coastal communities around the inland bays, but I'm sure across the state as well.
And 3/4 of our county's population is in unincorporated areas. So by and large, like that's the population we have to really hit through our education, is the folks that are not necessarily in the incorporated sections.
Yeah, and this is Christoph real quickly. You know, one of the like seminal present challenges with HOAs right now is like the conversion from looking at manicured green fertilized lawns to a prairie type of situation, or, you know, not prairie, but you know, a vegetated wilder situation is a huge lift. Having people accept trees as acceptable neighbors in their neighborhood is a big lift all of a sudden. It used to be that you'd want to be in that wonderful tree canopy development. Nowadays, people are afraid the trees are going to fall on their houses. They're afraid of having to go out and rake leaves in the fall or whatever it is. So, you know, and this is before we get to sort of the community resource ecological valuation that we're talking about. We just have so much work to do to help people to appreciate how managing their land has got some real value that they may not realize right now.
What would you like to contribute?
The Inland Bays have a lot of great examples of HOA projects that either the center's been involved with or have been privately involved with. And Go by the Bay is a great example. It took a long time. Seagrass Plantation, they paid for their entire project themselves. they found up their own funding strategies without going for grants. So it's the trick is, first of all, I think the community, our demographic is getting more interested in doing things with nature-based solutions than it was, say, 5-10 years ago. There's a shift going on there, and that has to do with who's retiring, what their interests are, and stuff like that. But also, from a consulting standpoint, you have to understand and expect to be putting more time in to educate HOAs and have more patience, and knowing that the project duration, most likely the front end is going to be much longer than would be, say, we're working for a state, like a nonprofit or an agency, just because of what Christoph has said. We have changes in personnel, and we have, and also it's their money. It's not someone else's money they're using. So it's a much more gentler approach and making them comfortable, which is education. That's what it comes down to. So you need that upfront investment to be successful at HOAs.
Doug, Ram.
So a few thoughts to add on this excellent discussion. I think the point of people not valuing wetlands is a good one. First of all, I think the question Claire asked, probably if it's a wetland, there shouldn't be a house on it to begin with, right? So we look at that kind of scenarios to a scenario where I see oftentimes, people filling wetlands, let alone mowing them down. But for whatever reason, they want the house to, a new house or construction access. So I don't think as a community or as a state, we do a good job of enforcing that, or even having a policy on what can and cannot be done. So that's really hurtful to see when you see that happening. In our own HOA, I live in Rehoboth Country Club area. There are 2 lots that I've been telling our HOA that they should buy and preserve. And these are over time, they get flooded all the time. They were supposed to be bought by by a group of investors from England. And eventually I said, these folks probably shouldn't build on this, because they are, they're in reality wetlands, at worst transitional wetlands during certain storm events. And they could get some sort of a tax benefit if they were to donate that to the HOA, and HOA in turn should preserve it. So I would go back, and this is a problem because a lot of our communities are, pre-existed these stormwater regulations and management policies. So we should go back and look at the 1960s, 40s communities and say, if you don't have a stormwater pond, if you don't have a self-contained management for these even nuisance type flooding events, then you should perhaps have one. And how would you do that? And they get expensive. Coastal lands are expensive. So maybe the HOA should get a grant from the state or some other means. And maybe that's something we can think between CIB and other DENREC and other folks, how can we make that happen? That these lands can be preserved. They could be nice little lakes. They could have fringe wetlands, a boardwalk to walk dogs and other things. So that you could vision this very well using a couple of landscape architecture people, right? This could be benefits to the community than detractions. But having said that, I want to digress a little bit to your other question on policy. So if we look at restoring or creating wetlands, the point I made when I was introducing myself, it's very interesting here in the Northeast that we have a harder time restoring wetlands than putting material upland or up on a truck and sending it somewhere else. And why is that? We did a survey. We're working with the chief of engineers on identifying what we call barriers to beneficial use. And as part of that, we did a couple different tiers of survey. One was working with the Corps of Engineer project managers to get their viewpoint on why aren't we doing more beneficial use with this kind of, dredge material as a resource. And then we also looked at the industry, and the industry feedback was very fascinating. So we had, we asked the question, who do you think is very much in support of, nature-based solutions and beneficial use? And on the slide, we would have, the bigger the letter means, the more impactful that agency is. Right smack in the middle was USA's, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, followed by EPA, NOAA, Fish and Wildlife, and then state agencies. Then we asked the question, who do you think is the number one person obstructing these? And to our surprise, the big bold letter right smack in the middle was USA's, along with the same agencies. So if you pause and ask yourself the question, why is that the case? Well, the core ecologists and navigation people want to do the right thing, and they want to restore the ecology. And the state folks, in our case, DNREC, follows that, right? Because they work hand in hand. Now comes the core regulatory folks who don't talk to the core navigation people, and they say, wait a second, it's a resource. Some of them likes islands, but they hate wetlands. Some of them likes wetlands, they hate islands. Some of them don't like either one, they like beaches, right? So then the state Fish and Wildlife follows suit with that group because the feds give the direction. So this is the problem we have. So we get into this, kind of a gridlock situation where the same agency that is tasked with protecting a resource gets so confused by the intent of the project that it's almost treated as if you're building a new house, right? So when you say, I'm going to, and there are many cases here, if you look around, I don't want to mention names, but if you look at any system that if you go back in Google Earth timescale, you see, oh, this could really be restored 2x the size it is today, we have number of problems. Whereas if I say, oh, we're going to put this in a DNREC CDF, the answer would be sure. Here you go, you get a permit. So this is the system we need to change. And I think, Christoph, it needs to come from your level and speaking to DNREC secretaries and other folks to bring about that change. And one of the things we're working with many state agencies and the federal folks is, how can you permit a project that results net positive benefit in the long term? I think you have to have a separate permitting flow chart for this so that you can look at this and say, yes, there is an impact. You're going to put some sediments in the water, but it will return so many co-benefits over time. And right now we don't.
Ashley, I've seen you unmute your state agency rep.
I just wanted to add to Ram's point about regulations, right? And the regulatory versus practitioner kind of disconnect, right? Covering up my logo for a second, but these regulations for wetlands were written at a time when they were trying to manage development of wetlands, right? Fill for development. And they haven't been updated since to think about fill for restoration, knowing now that these wetlands are not keeping up with sea level rise, right? We need to build that elevation for nature, not for development. So that's something that I think about too when we talk about climate action plan implementation at the state level. The wetlands maps that are used to regulate wetlands in the state are based on maps from the 80s. Things have changed significantly, right? So that's something, again, in my role as technical assistance for climate action plan implementation, what data do we need to make that change to update those maps and everything too? So there's some restrictions that the regulators have in the laws themselves that are preventing that from being implemented. So
I guess I go back to the beginning of the question was the political will. Do we have it yet to go and address some of these regulations that are maybe outdated and need to be updated? Do we have
that's an interesting question. Yeah.
We have to put the resources, the financial resources behind updating the maps and whatever else is needed.
I think at this point, in my experience so far, we have had good experience in doing the background work to do that stuff, right? So the coastal regulatory building line on the beaches, we have backing to say, okay, what does it look like if we were to update it? In terms of the actual updates, I would argue that some of this new legislation passed will help to add some resources and attention to making those changes and forcing people to make those changes. I will just say that at a state level, capacity is also really tight. If anyone has applied for a wetlands permit in a while, it takes a long time. They're super stretched with capacity. So there is a capacity issue at the state level to look towards the future and not just get done what they need to get done under state law, right? So hopefully climate action plan and the climate legislation will help alleviate some of those and put resources towards that.
Doug, I see your hands raised. Christoph, you are unmuted. So let Doug comment first and then Christoph will go to you.
there's also two behind the scenes things going on too. If we're working on many states up and down the East Coast, is that we have a legal component to the permit process. So a lot of our regulations are so protective towards the state where they don't handcuffs them. You know, so like in New Jersey, for example, they're not allowed to write policy into the regulatory program because their attorneys said they can't. They used to, and they got rid of them because it exposed them parental liability. And also we have a very polar society with regard to restoration. We have some lobby communities that view restoration could be impacting to say development or something else like that. So when you do wetland regulations, it's kind of a win-lose situation for a political entity because they'll get either praised on one side and they'll get beat the heck on the other side. So it's not a very comfortable thing to push forward. You know, it's difficult. So between those two things, that's been a real big, really helps really stagnate a lot of regulations over the last decade or so, is because we have a lot of things that are obstructing and dragging an anchor behind the process along the way, then it dies because it runs out of energy to the next push. And that's what we've been dealing with for quite some time.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on Ashley's and Doug's points. When you don't have resources, you can't be creative. You know, you're just plowing through a pile in your inbox and you're not thinking about those wonderful possibilities that everybody on the panel has referenced, Doug and Ram in particular, but everybody. So there's a creative loss there. Dealing with the regs that we're talking about, whether it's wetlands or stormwater management or what have you, are third rails for agencies. A requires creativity. B, it requires somebody who has a pile of things in their inbox to take time out to do the other thing. And that's if that person exists. So those are challenges. I think the will is also a bit of a challenge. I think as Ashley mentioned, we've got some new law here in Delaware that I think is going to help refocus the discussion and drive us towards solutions that wouldn't come through the pipeline otherwise. So there's an opportunity to really think about climate resilience because now it's a responsibility of the state agencies to execute these things. So I'm encouraged by that. The other impediment politically is how much does it cost for DNREC to do its job? When I was secretary, it was safe to say that we had the resources to do the job. There were places and ways that we couldn't do it, but you know, where it suffered certainly is on enforcement and on regulatory development and capacity to, you know, get permits turned around, do all those sorts of things. That's a real challenge. And if you look at the budget line over a long period of time, there's been a gradual but consistent degradation in DNREC capacity. So, you know, bringing all these forces together, and I will say for the benefit of the larger group that we have a change in administration in the offing. And I say from a public perspective, an opportunity to sort of put these things in black and white and to present them as opportunities for a new administration, new opportunities to assert leadership, to claim credit, to do all those things, but certainly to be willing to touch that third rail and get a bit of a shock for the larger public benefit.
So one of our next Jamboard slides, and we've touched on this, but it's about those resources. And so I have to say, I hear about resources, federal resources, money coming to the state. Is that not going to be enough? Those infrastructure laws and these new acts that are being passed to address some of these things. Do we have the strategic plan for how to use funds that may be coming and then leverage them to get the resources we need? When we talk about educational resources, Danielle and I, we do education. I know the center's engaged in education. How many more people do we need to be doing this to really have that impact? These are questions that I'm thinking of, and I don't know that there is one answer or a right answer, but anything else to elaborate on that?
I completely understand that, Jen. I feel like every day there's a new notice of funding opportunity for federal grants. I will say, again, from the DNREC perspective, and other organizations, frankly, it's the capacity to apply for those grants. It's the capacity to then manage those grants, to do the work in the grants, right? I think that's starting to land with the federal agencies that, so NOAA, for example, who funds my program for the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and for the IRA funding, they have a set aside where the programs will get non-competitive capacity building money. The idea to help us apply for these more competitive opportunities. But things like what you said, Jen, a strategic plan that says what are our priorities in the inland bays, that helps us, DENREC, or other organizations say, it's been identified through this great process that CIB or someone else has gone through, and we can put our money towards that project because we all agree it's a good project. So it's the question of, is it enough? I would argue we're still going to have a lot of hard choices to make, I think, in the future. This is a temporary situation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would I'd like to say that I feel like the state would benefit from articulating a vision for climate resilience and adaptation. The state's done a really good job articulating goals for greenhouse gas mitigation and sort of that overall strategy on that side of the coin. But I don't think we have that really articulated for the adaptation side.
And that's something we're definitely thinking about, because we're gonna, now under this new law, we have to update our climate action plan. The adaptation side of our current climate action plan is frankly clear as mud, right? Even for
like almost a one-liner, right? Like,
yeah,
we
well,
want to
and
have
it's
people
focused
be
on
resilient.
actions, not statewide priorities, right? So continue, Danielle, but that's something we are absolutely thinking about for that update.
Yeah, and I'm so excited by that, because I, as someone that's working on the ground and with many of you on, climate resilience stuff, it feels to me like we're all kind of, and I'm including me in this, knee-jerking sort of the response, like, all right, there is a notice of funding opportunity. I'm going to go after that, and it's going to tell me sort of the kind of things I got to hit, and I'm going to do that because there's funding. Or, there's a screening tool that tells me I got to work in this community. I'm going to work on that. But holistically, are we prioritizing our needs and thinking strategically, about what we've got to do, and are we all working from that same framework? And I think that in some respects we're not. And we're all doing our best, right? But I think we can all benefit from having more of a common framework of understanding where is the most exposure to climate change and who are our most vulnerable citizens within those areas that are exposed, and then what are our principles that the state, is urging us to all embody, equitable adaptation, investments in green infrastructure. But sometimes just articulating that and putting it under a common vision could really help, I think, all of us. So I don't know, I think of that as almost a capacity thing, because then we can be a little bit additionally smarter at our approaches.
Well, this is, I think Danielle has nailed it. I think a comprehensive vision focused on resilience for the state of Delaware would be hugely helpful. I would say intimately related to that, and something we're also sorely lacking in the state of Delaware, is a comprehensive state-enforced land use guidance. We've got a whole lot of state-based recommendatory things and a great respect for home rule. And people say, well, that's the end of the story. The local governments, the counties drive the boat. We do not have the authority to override whatever those decisions may be. My feeling of it is that home rule is a gift of the state to the localities. And we have a whole lot of decision making going on. And all of you who know the eastern side of Sussex County know damn well that there is development going on that has no respect for comprehensive plans and all those other things that the state has created to guide and hopefully inform and hopefully provide a basis for good implementation for development. We see it time and time and time again. Claire, thank you. You've highlighted a few particular examples of where this has gone haywire. And there's some of us who were involved with state government at the time when those comprehensive planning requirements were put in place who are dismayed at the failure of comprehensive planning to do what we had originally hoped that it would do. So there is a process afoot to take a look at what went south and what the needs are, especially comprehensively looking at resilience, certainly, but all the other issues that are intimately related to this. Is there and where is affordable housing in our state? Can people get from home to work without a whole lot of transportation required? What are our transportation needs? How is that dealt with? Where are the places, as Danielle was getting to, that we simply, from a climate perspective, if not natural resource value, not build? And make it a state requirement, not leave it up to a county to decide whether or not that seems like a recommendation they could live with or not. Establish that as a fundamental basis, but have some sort of wisdom and some sort of comprehensive view on land use that will wrap in all of these climate concerns, all the vulnerability concerns, all of the resilience needs, as well as the host of other things that are intimately related, which is like, where do poor people live? Where do we transport? How do we do that? I think it's critically important. So again, I think California, bless them, they'd have a tough time doing this. New York would be challenged, Texas probably. But Delaware, we should be able to figure this out. A, we're small enough, B, we're smart enough. And so I would just have people think about that sort of opportunity.
May I jump in just a minute?
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, I'm sorry. So my name is Rick Chamberlain. I'm a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee. Christoph, I hope you're not shuddering for about what I'm about to say, but little background. So I'm part of a very small grassroots group, 6 people. We've been working for 3 years, and I'm really liking what I'm hearing. I have to apologize. I didn't find out about this until I read in the Coastal Point, so I've only been on since about 11 o'clock. But I do so enjoy hearing some of the things that are being said about HOAs and advocacy and spreading the word and education. So our group has been working to establish an aquaculture hatchery at University of Delaware. And when we first started out, we were hit by the question many times, why does Delaware need another hatchery? Don't you have enough hatcheries? Well, of course, they were thinking about chicken hatcheries. So it quickly told us that there was no real knowledge about aquaculture hatcheries. There are 47 hatcheries from Maine to Florida, and we quickly learned Delaware had none. Trying to keep this brief, we have been able to establish an oyster hatchery at UD campus. CIB, we work very closely with them, and Anna Fagan, God bless her, has written 3 grants for us. So the hatchery, the first hatchery in Delaware, is up and running. We recently got $1.1 million from the General Assembly to further the development of a $15 million Fisheries and Aquaculture Innovation Center, again at UD. And we're proceeding with that. We've got some site survey plans in the works. But here's the point. We have spent 3 years trying to spread the word, and as the word has gotten out, the Indian River School District has come on board big time, and this goes to education. They have some very gifted aquaculture teachers at Sussex Central High School, and they are beginning the establishment with a professor at UD to begin an aquaculture curriculum, and that will begin this fall. And it will open up, it's a new pathway, and it will open up more jobs and courses of study for students. When the FAIC is established, it will open up much more in the way of studies, experimentation. We've got 2 very gifted scientists that are on our committee. But, and here's the but. Ashley, do I understand that you're with DENREC?
Yes.
I am, yes.
Okay. Okay. I like what you said about legislative changes. And please understand, I'm not trying to be derogatory, but right now, some of those regulations are standing in the way of putting oysters in the inland bays. And you all know, you're much more educated than I am, you all know the importance of shellfish in the water. So
Mr. Chamberlain, I think we're all on the same page that there's a lot of things that we can be doing legislatively as well as with engagement. And I appreciate hearing about some of the money that you've received for some of those hatchery efforts. I wanted to kind of get back though, and then almost as a segue to one of our final questions about if there was $50 million, what would our panelists like to see how that money would be invested towards improving coastal resilience in the inland bays? Perhaps they have some ideas about aquaculture, but it might be around some other ideas too. So I wanted to kind of get back to sharing time with the panelists.
Sure, if I interrupt, I apologize.
Sure, thank you. First of all, I have no doubt that we'll see that $50 million next year, thanks to Christoph and Megan and Anna. So that not a fictitious question, but I was going to comment just to touch upon what Christoph mentioned earlier. So not only should we have this mosaic of things we would like to restore in this, grand master plan for resiliency and restoration, I think it would help the community and the regulators to also do some visioning. And we do this nationally at the for the Corps of Engineers, looking at certain districts. Like we're working with 4 districts, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Mobile, and Great Lakes, Chicago, to show people, here's the shoreline now, what would it look like in 5 years if we had a project, right? So my question is, my answer to this is tied back to that. I think we need to have that sort of visioning, like how would we the inland bays to make it a more natural, resilient system? And the answers are plentiful, right? And CIB has done a lot of work already on this. So where can we put living shorelines, and where would you restore these wetlands and create new islands? So like Seal Island, Muddy Neck is another example. James Farm Pastor Point is another great example, Whole Snack. We have the Sand Island and the Middle Island, Gull Island, all of those. So I think we can have like this nice plan and lays out almost like an adaptation plan that a town or a city would undertake. When we did the work for Bethany, we kind of said, you have to first raise your transformers, then you need to raise your roadways, then you need to, so on and so forth. So I think the inland base needs to have that sort of a plan. Then you can attack it bite-sized pieces. Like when we get the first 5 million, this is what we're going to do. And then we do the next one. So those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you. Christoph, you're unmuted. Did you want to share?
I am, but I'm going to let other people weigh in. I'll hold off for a bit.
Ashley, you're next. And then Will, we haven't heard from you in a little while, so you're going right after Ashley, all right?
I have two thoughts. The first is a comprehensive flooding data set for the inland bays, right? We are going to be updating sea level rise scenarios. We have some idea of storm surge, but there's so much more that is changing and goes into flooding, right? Tom McKenna's on this call. Groundwater rise is something that's going to be coming with sea level rise. Runoff from development. We haven't plugged in stormwater infrastructure necessarily to those sea level rise and groundwater rise models, right? So it's complex to figure out where the floods are going to be with sea level rise. So that's a huge undertaking. And what we were talking about before, social science, right? That was something I had on the list, and including economics, right? And I saw a comment in the chat that I wanted to get back to about economics, about how that has led to environmental injustice, right? So that's something to really think about, the way that we've evaluated, say for benefit cost analysis for certain projects, right? Maybe skews it towards wealthier communities. So how do we look at that economic analysis to then include other benefits, other intangibles besides property values, is certainly something very important there. There's also going to be changing demographics, which will impact the social science of the area too. I would also say, just me personally, I think everyone on this panel is not originally from coastal Delaware. So understanding the values of the people who live here and who are coming here, I think would be really huge.
Thank you. Will.
Yeah, so this is a hard question to conceptualize. I'll say I feel like working in the nonprofit space so long, we have such a scarcity mindset that it's, you know, what do you do with $50 million, right? But I would say one priority would be staffing up. I think that especially at all levels. I mean, if we can fund more state and county staff, that would be great, but also for the nonprofits too. And that's just not just a plug for me to maintain my employment either, but just to put more bodies on the ground, more folks thinking about this, and really get more projects done at scale. I don't know what you do with the other 40 million, but it would be a good start.
Great. Danielle, do you want to chime in? We'll let Christoph close.
Sure. Yeah, these are great. I'm writing down some of the ideas. They're really good ones. And, you know, part of me is like, oh, 50 million, that's a lot. It's not really a lot. What I was thinking along the lines of is more of like establishing a resilience fund that maybe the Center for Inland Bays administers it. But given that we have such a large part of our population and our communities in unincorporated areas, what if we leverage a pot of funds for those entities, the HOAs, even the county, to then go provide the match for different grant and funding opportunities? I know our county's been very slow and reluctant to kind of participate in buyout programs. There's a cost there, right? And there's a staffing element too. And so if there was this fund that could maybe supplement some of that, maybe it would incentivize our HOAs to engage in some green infrastructure types of projects within their communities. I think maybe that there could be some good value there.
Yeah. Doug, I'll give you a second to chime in, and then in our last 5 minutes, I'll let Christoph speak and we'll wrap things up.
I think we should try to provide a different lens for communities and HOAs. Their shorelines and their marshes, is part of their landscape of where they live. They have no problem paying people to cut their grass every week, or to shovel their sidewalks, or to do any other kind of maintenance or capital expense. If they have the attitude where their shoreline, whether it be their beach, their marsh, whatever it may be, there is just like their lawn, then they can incorporate budgets and they do have some subcommittees to actually start working that way. And some subdivisions have done that successfully. So I think that is a great way of doing it, because you think about it, these subdivisions down at the beach around the inland bays are not small. They have hundreds of homeowners. And if they need a $300,000 or $400,000 project to protect their marsh or their shoreline, it comes out to be about $300 one-time capital expense. They can be tagged right onto their homeowner association bill for one time, and that's happened in the past. It's mechanisms. It's viewing how they look at these shorelines, and they shouldn't expect the government to pay for their resource. So they have to be part of it. They need to contribute to it as well. It's a mindset change, I think, is what we need to work on.
Thank you. Christoph.
Well, I love these responses. I think it's extraordinarily creative. Danielle, I like the idea of some sort of a resilience fund that would leverage that 50 million and create something that would be, let's say $250 million or something of that nature, so that we could get some of these investments. And picking up on Doug's point, to incentivize, to work with, to provide the nudge that HOAs would need to be partners in our effort. We think about, well, the center, what can the center do to increase resilience in our watershed? Well, we can encourage, we can cajole, we could do science, we could provide a foundation, we could help to educate people, but we can't do. Certainly not without the permission and partnership of folks who are occupying those coastal areas. So I think that it sounds like a really good idea. And certainly if you had a pot of money like that, you'd want to leverage it as fully as you possibly can. Gets to the economic questions, like what are the values of restoration and of a restored and resilient system. And if we can value that in any way, then we can monetize it, and we can certainly get partners to help us make that money go further. So anyway, it's a good thought for us, certainly as a center, to think about how would we establish something of that nature, and how would we finance it. And we'll let you know when we get to 50 million.
Great, thank you. I really want to thank all of our panelists. This has been a thought-provoking 90 minutes. I think you did a great job. Lots of ideas, lots of issues identified, and it makes me excited to think about what we might be able to do in the future when we get that $50 million to start doing this work and really focus those funds. So again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Brittany Sturgis for sharing the DTAP, and thank you to all of the other committee members who provided updates and introductions to themselves. I'll move quickly to open forum in the next minute. Is there anything from partners who have anything that they would like to share or bring to the attention of our membership? Somebody from the center, I know decked out, you've got registration going, don't you? What's the date? Does somebody want to put that into the chat quickly?
Sure, I can pop it into the chat. Date is Thursday, September 21st. We'll be back in Dewey Beach at the Hyatt Place. And yeah, tickets are on sale on our website. Link is coming.
Great, Anna, thank you. You're on it. Anything else, Christoph? Any other updates from the center?
No other updates. We will certainly keep committee members abreast of the filling the vacancy with Susie's passing, and also actually looking for ideas. So if people have suggestions who would be great board members, certainly let us know. And we'll also be working, I will, with the board members to figure out who our next chair should be and will be.
Great. Well, our next meeting is scheduled to be October 20th, again from 9 to 12. On the agenda, if you saw, it had a question mark. So we've had it in Dover once, had so-so attendance, had it back down at the beach once, kind of around the same numbers. Does anybody have a vote here? Dover, Lewis, we'll still offer it hybrid format either way, so that if you're not able to attend in person, we can Zoom you in. But we'll try to make sure that we're having some opportunities for that in-person networking as well. Megan, thoughts?
Just wanted to say that this is the most well-attended meeting of all the last ones. So
yeah,
we should definitely consider for next year, maybe 2 virtual and 2 in person. So if you're thinking about coming to next one, that might be the next in person for, at least a while. So.
Right. I see Molly has dropped that the Delaware National Estuary Research Reserve. Go ahead.
I just threw it in the chat, but the Delaware National Estuary Research Reserve, oh my gosh, such a mouthful, is hosting an Estuary Expo in September with an optional field trip the day before, and the registration's now open, so I've dropped that in the chat.
Great. Danielle, what about Coast Day? October 2nd, 1st, something like that? First Sunday in October.
Yeah, it was just, yes, it's the first Sunday. It's October 1 this year. I was just trying to put that in the chat. I think it's 11 to 3 p.m. this year. We're back, last year we had a bit of a hurricane, messy storm get in the way of it. And then we had COVID before that. So we're really looking forward to being back in form this year, and welcome all of you to attend, or potentially for our organizations to exhibit. So I'll try to dig out the link, but Coast Day, it's kind of easy to Google.
You'll find it.
Thank you.
Great. Well, yeah, so if there's thoughts on physical location, drop me a note, but we will make that executive decision and share it with everybody prior to our next meeting. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your summer. I hope you get to vacation if you haven't already, and I hope everyone has a great start to the school academic year if you're engaged with students in any way, whether they're your own or if you're part of an academic organization. And so we'll see you guys October 20th, if not before. Have a great Friday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
I think 4 of us are going to stay. Okay, that's it. Great meeting.